Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Norberto Ronquillo. In 2019, Norberto Ronquillo, a 22-year-old Mexican student, was kidnapped by unidentified men shortly after leaving college. He had just completed his final semester before graduating. Norberto lived with his uncles in southern Mexico City, just a 15-minute walk from Pedregal University, on the evening of July 4. He left the university at 9 p.m. and texted his girlfriend to say he was coming home. A security camera recorded him leaving the building at around 9:30 p.m., but he disappeared afterward. The case attracted widespread attention in Mexico, and finding those responsible should have been easy. However, the mastermind managed to confuse the investigation, creating a bizarre story that captured the attention of many. Norberto was born in Meoqui, Chihuahua. He was known for being very sociable and charming. He was always ready to help those in need and was well liked by many. Norberto's dream was to move to Mexico City to study marketing at Pedregal University after graduation. Upon arriving in the capital, he lived with his uncles, aunts, and cousins. By the age of 22, his life seemed to be in order. He was dating a girl. On July 4, 2019, Norberto left class at around 9:30 p.m. A surveillance camera recorded him leaving the university parking lot while calmly talking on the phone. Just 15 minutes after he left, his uncles and aunts received a call from his phone. But it was not Norberto on the other end of the line. Another voice informed them that their nephew was being held captive. The young uncle panicked and abruptly hung up. The kidnappers called back, but no one answered. Finally, Norberto's aunt picked up the phone and spoke to the criminals. Their message was clear: to see their nephew Norberto alive. His uncle's family needed to hand over 5 million pesos that night at 10 p.m. The police received a report of a gray Toyota Yaris abandoned in the middle of the road. This was the same model that Norberto owned when the police arrived. They failed to secure the area for potential evidence and did not call in forensic experts to conduct a thorough investigation. This mishandling complicated the case, especially since the car was parked near Norberto's uncle's house, with the keys left on the sidewalk. When Norberto's cousin Osvaldo returned home, he saw the police nearby and informed them that the car belonged to his family. Unfortunately, the police carelessly returned the car to Osvaldo, who was unaware of the troubling events involving his family. At midnight, Osvaldo returned home and received shocking news. He quickly decided to take his father to the police to report the incident. 40 minutes later, the case was officially opened. Meanwhile, Norberto's aunt chose to handle things differently. At 1 a.m., she asked her husband and son to withdraw the complaint, claiming that she had made a deal with the kidnappers. She also negotiated the ransom down to 500 pesos and some jewelry. However, it was too late. The police had already begun their investigation. Meanwhile, the kidnappers made their demands. At 3:30 a.m., Osvaldo was ordered to pay the ransom for Norberto's safe return. They instructed Osvaldo to go to Las Bombas Street, stop at a car wash, collect the money, and throw it behind bars in an empty lot. Osvaldo carefully followed all the instructions. Then the kidnappers informed him that Norberto would be released at the Chalcocan Canal. Osvaldo waited there for hours, but Norberto never arrived. The kidnappers also stopped communicating, and there was no further contact. At 7 in the morning, Osvaldo decided to call the police, who quickly began searching for the missing person. On June 5, at 10 a.m., the Prosecutor General's office officially opened an investigation. Norberto's relatives were summoned to the Ministry of Defense to provide witness statements. Meanwhile, footage from city cameras was reviewed, but no useful information was found. Cameras that may have captured footage of Norberto's abandoned car were thoroughly examined. Unfortunately, they were pointed in the wrong direction. The only camera facing the right direction was broken. The family's desperation quickly spread throughout the country. On June 6th, Norberto did not return home, and news of his disappearance was widely reported. The university then helped raise awareness, leading to media coverage of the kidnapping during his graduation ceremony. Norberto's classmates took the opportunity to rally support for the search. Dressed in caps and gowns, they displayed posters with Norberto's picture, which quickly attracted attention on social media. Norberto's mother traveled to the capital and appeared on several television shows. On June 8, a search was conducted in the areas where Norberto's car had been found. Unfortunately, this search did not uncover any new clues. The kidnappers did not contact anyone. As if they had disappeared, questions about Norberto's whereabouts continued to echo throughout the country for a long time. There was only silence, but that silence was finally broken. On June 9 at 6 p.m., the police received an anonymous tip about a body wrapped in a blanket that had been found in the Xochimilco area. The police quickly arrived at the reported location. The area was deserted, with no surveillance cameras, suggesting that the perpetrators had planned the crime carefully. The police sent the body for an autopsy. On June 10, Norberto's family came to identify the body. His family confirmed that the body found was Norberto. The autopsy revealed that he had died of exhaustion, and there were signs of torture on his body, including a broken nasal septum. As the investigation continued, the case became increasingly puzzling. Forensic experts reported that the body could have been there for 3 to 5 days, suggesting that Norberto may have died on the day he was kidnapped. Despite attempts to negotiate a ransom with the family, the criminals had no plans to release Norberto, however. These are still just theories. As many uncertainties surrounding the case remain, Norberto's body was cremated, and after the funeral, he was flown back to his hometown. The university suspended all academic activities for 3 days. The investigation into his death continues. Norberto's mother has used social media to call for justice and urge safety measures for all young people to prevent tragedies like her son's from happening again. The first to face consequences was the police, who ignored Norberto's car, a potential piece of evidence. Traces of blood were later found inside the car, but were never tested. When Norberto's cousin Osvaldo got into the car to take it to the garage, he accidentally contaminated potential evidence, however. Osvaldo did not know that Norberto was missing at the time, and only learned about it when he got home. Since then, the car has not been mentioned again. The Attorney General's office has analyzed more than 20 hours of video from 6 cameras, including state and private cameras. Located near the scene of the incident, it appears that the criminals used 2 cars to carry out the kidnapping. It was revealed that one of the cars was used to distract attention from the criminals and only intervened if any problems arose. The second car was used specifically for the purpose of kidnapping Norberto. The information gathered led to a 2-part investigation. First, it was assumed that the kidnapping was carried out by a Mexican organized crime group known to the media as the Skinheads. This group targeted students from private universities and high schools within a 10-kilometer radius of Xochimilco. One similarity with Norberto's case is that the gang had previously carried out 5 kidnappings, 3 of which resulted in the victims being killed even after their families had paid ransoms. Furthermore, records show that these victims usually died within the first 48 hours of their capture. However, there are some notable characteristics of skinhead gangs. They shave the victim's head before releasing or killing them. In Norberto's case, his head was not shaved, and there was no evidence that he was being held captive. Negotiations between criminal groups and families are common in these types of crimes. Considering this, the police formed a second hypothesis. The crime could have been committed by someone close to the Norberto. they decided to question Norberto's acquaintances. The prosecutor general's office found it suspicious that the ransom was arranged so quickly, in just 20 minutes. And it was hard to believe that the criminals would agree to a discount for the family. It was also strange that Norberto's aunt refused to involve the police. Later, the police interviewed Norberto's girlfriend, aunt, uncle, cousins, and close friends. Finally, a breakthrough occurred. The police noticed that Euritzi's ex-boyfriend seemed to be interfering too much in Norberto and Euritzi's private lives. He often expressed dissatisfaction with their relationship, however. Euritzi and Norberto appeared to be a happy couple, regularly sharing photos of themselves together on social media. The day before Norberto went missing, his girlfriend Euritzi posted a tweet that appeared to be directed at her ex-boyfriend, urging him to stop interfering in her life and focus on his own. The Attorney General's office quickly launched an investigation into Euritzi's ex-boyfriend, but the investigation stalled when he could not be found. Finally, a crucial piece of evidence emerged that had previously been overlooked. The red plaid blanket that had been used to wrap Norberto's body had the name Hernandez embroidered on it, indicating that it belonged to a family with that surname. This raised suspicions about Norberto's maternal family. The Attorney General's office investigated 47 people with the surname Hernandez. Unfortunately, these investigations were fruitless and caused delays. Meanwhile, the most promising lead in the case came from surveillance cameras. When the police reviewed footage from a camera on Las Bombas Street, they saw a white van and a red sedan drive by at 3 a.m. shortly after Osvaldo delivered the ransom, with 3 people getting out of the vehicles. After receiving new information, the police were able to clarify some important details. They quickly identified the red sedan and its owner. This discovery led to several arrests. The first arrest was of Daniel, the owner of the red sedan. In his statement, Daniel explained that he used the car to transport passengers for a private company. He said that the person driving the car that night was actually his friend, Oscar. The police then went to Miguel Hidalgo to find Oscar. When Oscar was arrested, the police found packages containing illegal synthetic substances. They also learned that he had previously been involved in a criminal case. Based on information provided by Daniel and Oscar, the police arrested Jose Fernando, who was also found to have illegal substances. On July 7, more than a month after Norberto's death, the preliminary results of the investigation were released to the public, creating considerable interest. The police stated that one of the suspects was Daniel's cousin, but Daniel's father insisted that he had never heard of Norberto. This raised questions about how Daniel could have known Norberto and why he would plan to kill him. New evidence quickly emerged in the case to expedite the investigation. Oscar appeared in court a few days later and surprisingly confessed to being involved in the crime. They uncovered key details and identified a woman named Euritzi Martinez, Norberto's ex-lover, as the mastermind behind the crime. Euritzi met Norberto about 3 years ago, and they dated for a short time. Romantic photos and messages to her were found on Norberto's Facebook page, and his aunt confirmed their relationship. However, the motive behind Euritzi's involvement in the crime remains unclear. Euritzi asked for Norberto to be kidnapped because he owed her 700 pesos. They planned to demand 5 million pesos from his family after she received the money. The rest would be divided among the kidnappers. Euritzi claimed that Norberto's uncle and aunt owned shops in the Central Market, which would make it easier for them to collect the ransom. However, things quickly spiraled out of control, and Norberto was killed on the night of his kidnapping. The police promptly opened a case against Norberto's ex-girlfriend, Euritzi. Until July 14, she was still active on social media after the arrest warrant for Euritzi was issued. She disappeared. She deleted her social media accounts and turned off her cell phone. A few days later, the investigation revealed that there was no debt between Norberto and Eurydice. It became clear that she only wanted to profit from Norberto's family. On July 28, 2019, Daniel and Oscar were arrested and taken into custody at a pre-trial detention facility. Initially, it seemed that the case was almost solved, with the only remaining task being to find Eurydice. However, during the investigation, the police discovered that Elvia, the owner of the house where Norberto had been held, was involved in the kidnapping. On September 21, Elvia was arrested for unlawful deprivation of liberty following her arrest. New details of the investigation emerged. It was revealed that Elvia was a witch and that the kidnappers had approached her to perform a ritual to assist in the kidnapping. Elvia had voluntarily joined the criminal group, motivated by the prospect of receiving a portion of the ransom. The final arrest in the case occurred on October 22. When the police apprehended Jose Fernando, they sought him for drug trafficking 3 days later. After being taken to prison, Jose was informed that he would also face charges for kidnapping Norberto. This indicated that the case was close to being resolved. However, the family could not achieve full justice because the main instigator, Eurydice Martinez, was still on the run. The Mexico City judiciary found Jose, Daniel, Elvia, and Oscar guilty of kidnapping and murdering Norberto Ronquillo. They were each sentenced to 140 years in prison and ordered to pay more than $1 million pesos in damages. 4 years after the case, Eurydice is still missing. Hello everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of Barbara Maybe Abel. There are books and films that help teach ways to confront criminals and appropriate behavior during kidnappings or critical situations. However, reading about these scenarios and actually experiencing them are two different things. Barbara Abel fully realized this when one of the most dangerous criminals in the U.S. showed up at her doorstep. On November 14, 1974, a scared Dale ran to his neighbor's house and began knocking frantically on the door. When the neighbor opened it, he found the boy covered in blood with strange marks on his ankles. Dale explained that the marks were from ropes used by an unknown man who had tied him and his Aunt Beverly while his mother, Barbara, was kidnapped. The neighbor quickly called 911. When the police arrived at the Abel family's home, it looked like a crime scene. There was blood everywhere, and the neighbor noted that Barbara's car was missing, along with her. Dale assisted the detectives by providing details about his mother, 31-year-old Barbara Maybe Abel, who had a twin sister named Beverly, who had been diagnosed with cerebral palsy. The twin sisters shared a deep bond from childhood. Barbara consistently supported and cared for Beverly. As they grew older, their relationship became stronger, with Barbara always striving to improve Beverly's quality of life and help her manage daily challenges. Barbara was smart, cheerful, and serious when necessary. After their father passed away, young Barbara took on many household responsibilities to help her mother. Throughout her life, she maintained a positive outlook and supported her loved ones during tough times. In April 1968, she gave birth to her son, Dale, and felt immense joy as a new mother. However, she soon faced challenges, primarily due to her breakup with the baby's father. Their disagreements had begun about a year before Dale was born. Although they hoped Dale would help resolve their issues, things only got worse. Ultimately, Barbara chose to raise her son as a single mother, later reflecting that this was the right decision for both of them, as it allowed her to create a stable environment for herself and her child. Unfortunately, the family faced a series of challenges. In May 1974, their mother passed away from an illness, leaving them in shock. It felt as if their world had collapsed. Their family had always been very close, so their mother's death deeply affected both Barbara and Beverly. Despite their grief, they tried to maintain a normal environment for the younger generation. Barbara worked diligently, writing and taking a job at a radio station, while Beverly managed household chores. They lived in a modest home in Palm Beach, Florida, and surrounded 6-year-old Dale with love and care, gradually recovering from this tragedy. On November 14, 1974, it seemed like an ordinary day for the Abel family. Beverly assisted Barbara in getting ready for work, and Dale was preparing for school. After dropping Dale off, Barbara went to the radio station where she worked as a news editor. Around noon, she tried to call Beverly, who was at home, but there was no answer. This was strange because Beverly never missed calls. She was always eager to talk, but this time she didn't even call back. Initially, Barbara thought her sister might have fallen asleep and didn't think much of it, so she continued with her work. After leaving the radio station around 5 p.m., she picked up Dale and headed home, expecting to see her sister there. As soon as they entered, she called Beverly, but there was no answer. Barbara asked her son to find his aunt, thinking she might have been listening to music and hadn't heard them come home. While Barbara went to the kitchen, she felt a sudden and intense fear that sent a chill down her spine. It was a deep, instinctual dread, and in that moment, she heard a voice say, "Don't turn around or I'll attack." Just then, her son Dale rushed into the kitchen and said that his aunt was in the bedroom and bleeding. When Barbara turned around, she saw a man pointing a weapon at her and Dale. Staying calm, she told the intruder that she needed to see her twin sister because she was worried about her. This was a risky move, but it seemed to impress the man, who agreed to let her see her sister. With the weapon still aimed at them, Barbara and Dale cautiously walked toward the bedroom, trying to keep Dale away from the armed man. Beverly was in the bedroom, lying on the bed with a gag in her mouth, crying. Barbara kissed her sister and whispered that everything would be all right. Barbara noticed that Beverly was undressed under the blanket. Unable to hold back her feelings, she confronted the attacker, questioning whether he had abused Beverly. He responded with laughter, claiming he had attempted to assault Beverly but had failed. His cruel smile and taunting words sent another chill down Barbara's spine. Following this, she tried to bribe the assailant. She revealed that she had a significant amount of money at home and was willing to give him her car keys. In return, she pleaded with him to leave them alone and not to harm them. The stranger, however, expressed his desire to take her child and reach for the boy. Barbara firmly declared that she would never give up her son and instead offered to take Dale's place. The man agreed. The assailant identified himself as Paul John Knowles and claimed he had just escaped from prison, stating he had no plans to return. He warned Barbara that he wouldn't harm her as long as she followed his orders exactly. Although Barbara knew he was lying and likely wouldn't let her go easily, she felt she had no good options left. Her primary concern was the safety of her son and her injured sister, who needed help. However, Paul was determined to keep them as hostages to buy time for his escape. He tightly bound Dale's and Beverly's hands and feet on the bed. Barbara was horrified at the thought of leaving her loved ones in such a vulnerable state, but she realized that any resistance could endanger their lives. Throughout this terrifying situation, she remained calm, speaking to her family as if everything was normal, reassuring them that it would all be over soon and that they would be all right. This approach worked. She managed to soothe her child and keep the kidnapper from becoming agitated. Barbara emphasized that they should not provoke Paul, as she had no way of knowing his true intentions. Her goal was to lead the attacker far away from her home and loved ones, then find a way to escape and alert the authorities. Paul accepted the offered money and car keys. He pointed the weapon at Barbara, then got into the car and drove away. Throughout this time, Barbara was primarily concerned about her family. More than 30 minutes later, Dale escaped and sought help. The police responded to the call. They found an abandoned car near the house, which was the vehicle used by the kidnapper. The car was registered in one state, but its license plate had been stolen from another location. Investigations revealed that the car had been stolen from a man named William Bates a couple of months earlier. Eventually, William's body was discovered, strangled, in Ohio. Inside the car's glove compartment, detectives discovered numerous credit cards and insurance policies, the majority of which belonged to Carswell Carr. The man had become a victim of a double homicide along with his 15-year-old daughter, Amanda, just days before Barbara's kidnapping. The tragedy at the Carr home in Milledgeville, Georgia, was one of the most horrifying scenes the investigators had ever witnessed. A 15-year-old girl had been brutally strangled, and her father had suffered around 30 stab wounds. It was evident that the perpetrator was a dangerous individual, prepared to kill anyone who interfered. On November 6, 1974, the Carr home, located almost 7 kilometers from where Barbara lived, was found ransacked. Inside the car, discovered near the home of Barbara, a will belonging to a man named Paul John Knowles was also found. Once law enforcement checked their database, they identified Paul as an escaped serial killer. Authorities linked him to at least 35 murders across the United States. He traveled aimlessly, leaving behind trails of blood and bodies, completely indifferent to the consequences of his actions. He selected his victims randomly. Unlike most psychopaths, who usually target a specific type, he took lives with the same pleasure, whether the victim was a child or an adult. He left behind a lot of evidence, but there were no hints about his next actions. Meanwhile, Barbara and Paul were driving Barbara's car when he discovered he was wanted by the police. He forced Barbara to change the radio station. She complied and noticed that he seemed to expect the news to be on all channels, while others remained quiet, which frustrated him. At that moment, she was still unaware of his true nature. Suddenly, he confessed to having killed several people. This made Barbara uncomfortable, so she tried to change the topic to distract him from his violent past by discussing the weather, movies, or anything unrelated. Despite her attempts, he continued to casually mention his killings. Barbara began to act flirtatiously, realizing that her femininity might be her only chance for escape. Barbara decided to try to win him over. She called him sweet and offered him a cigarette. When Paul asked why she was being so nice, Barbara replied that she didn't believe he was a bad person, and even said he reminded her of the famous actor Robert Redford. This seemed to work. After the comparison, Paul became much more responsive, calm, and easier to talk to. They continued their conversation as if nothing bad had happened, as if they were simply on a date. Paul asked Barbara what she did for a living. She replied that she was a news editor on the radio and dreamed of writing a book. This excited Paul, who seemed genuinely interested in her ambitions, especially the idea that she could write a book about him. He expressed a desire to become famous, mentioning that he wanted the book's proceeds to go to his mother, but he didn't specify how he planned to achieve that fame. He repeatedly claimed to have killed many times. Although she was terrified, Barbara tried to hide her fear and remain calm. At one point, she realized that her only chance to escape was to push Paul out of the moving car, but she couldn't summon the strength or courage to do it. Barbara understood that if the investigators discovered who she was with, they would likely conclude that she was already dead. Paul was a ruthless predator with an insatiable thirst for killing. He was unpredictable and armed, which made him extremely dangerous. The most frightening aspect was that they were in an unknown location, and she had no idea where Paul was taking her. The detectives discovered that he was traveling between different states, often switching cars, and that his attacks consistently resulted in death. Occasionally, he took hostages, all of whom ended up dead. The chances of Barbara surviving her abduction were deemed very slim, but her family and friends refused to give up hope. They believed she could still be found alive. Law enforcement officials realized they had to act quickly because with every minute that passed, the likelihood of rescuing Barbara decreased. A search perimeter was set up on the roads in West Palm Beach, along with checkpoints. Authorities announced plans to intercept the suspect, Paul, focusing on Barbara's distinctive golden vehicle. However, detectives were unaware that they were too late. Paul had already taken Barbara beyond the checkpoints. Paul arrived with Barbara at a motel in Fort Pierce, about 100 kilometers from the scene of the abduction. He intended to rest there for the night and had no plans to release Barbara. To avoid suspicion, they registered as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, pretending to be on their honeymoon. Barbara felt that the hotel receptionist was suspicious of them based on her gaze. Meanwhile, she knew that Paul was carrying a weapon at his waist. To allay the receptionist's suspicions, Barbara embraced Paul and acted like a loving wife. This successfully convinced the administrator, who then handed them the key to the room. As soon as they entered the room, Paul ordered Barbara to take off her clothes. Barbara felt scared and protested, saying she was too tired, but Paul ignored her and insisted she comply. While the criminal was trying to do his dirty deed, she thought of everything that came to mind about her son and sister in order to detach herself from what was happening, but at first, she couldn't manage it. Paul grew frustrated and angry, becoming aggressive toward her. Sensing his loss of control, Barbara calmly asked him what he was trying to accomplish, which helped ease his anger momentarily. However, he later abused her. At one point, he shared with her that he had two personalities, referring to them as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, explaining his frequent mood changes. Barbara found it hard to predict his rapid shifts in temperament. After a brief period of calm, Paul suddenly ripped the bed sheets, tied Barbara up with them, and threw her onto the bed before turning on the television. Exhausted both mentally and physically, she eventually fell asleep. In her dreams, Barbara saw her deceased mother, who reassured her that everything would be fine. At that moment, Barbara understood it was a sign and resolved to do whatever it took to save herself. While she slept, she heard news reports and saw Paul intently watching a broadcast that displayed her photographs alongside those of Paul. His identity had already been established. They also reported on other crimes committed by Paul that were known at that time. Barbara was horrified. She understood that her chances of rescue were extremely low. Meanwhile, Paul reveled in the attention he was receiving from the media. Barbara recognized that he desperately wanted to become famous. Later, Paul went to sleep, tying his leg to Barbara's to prevent her from escaping. By November 15, the police still had no leads on her whereabouts. The search for Paul had escalated to a national scale. Headlines in all newspapers and on television shouted that the most dangerous criminal in the country was killing again. Barbara woke up in the morning next to Paul. She had barely slept the entire night, terrified to be tied to one of America's most wanted criminals. Paul took her to the nearest diner for breakfast. While he eagerly devoured scrambled eggs, toast, pancakes, and orange juice, Barbara couldn't eat anything. She glanced around nervously, hoping someone would recognize her, while also looking for ways to escape. However, she quickly noticed that Paul's weapon was aimed at her. He warned her not to make any sudden movements. To her dismay, she realized that no one seemed to recognize them, despite the extensive news coverage and radio alerts. Barbara understood that she couldn't rely on anyone for help. She was too scared to scream or ask for assistance, fearing it would only worsen her situation. She decided to keep playing her role, believing it would save her life. She buried her face in the plate and had a small breakfast. Afterward, Paul and Barbara returned to the motel, where he abused her again. Initially, she fought back, which only fueled his anger. At one point, Barbara feared for her life, believing he might not stop in his rage. However, she managed to save herself once more by employing her understanding and psychological tactics. She stayed calm, engaged him in conversation, and successfully avoided a violent outcome for the second time. During their dialogue, Paul mentioned that he wanted to get to know Barbara before everything changed, clearly referring to his criminal actions. Thus, she realized that she had found a way to connect with him, and her chances of a positive outcome immediately increased. Later, Paul tied her to the bed again and stepped out to make a phone call. Barbara struggled to free herself, but was unsuccessful. Then she noticed a key on the nightstand. It appeared that Paul had hastily closed the door and locked it. Oddly, it seemed as if he had done this intentionally, perhaps to protect her from himself. A few minutes later, he began banging on the door from the outside. Barbara waited in silence, her heart racing. Through the door, he told her that he knew she couldn't speak because of the gag in her mouth. He urged her not to tell the police that Paul had hurt her, claiming he never meant to harm her and was sorry for what had happened. His final words were, "I love you, and I'm leaving." After that, the sounds outside faded away. He had truly left. At first, Barbara was too scared to move. She didn't scream or call for help, fearing he was still outside, waiting for a reason to hurt her. She wondered if he had said those things to test her, as if she needed to prove something. However, she also realized that if she waited too long, he might change his mind, and she would miss her chance to escape. Finally, Barbara managed to free herself using the sharp edge of a piece of glass from the nightstand. She quickly called the front desk, telling them that a serial killer had kidnapped her, then hung up. The administrator alerted the police and requested assistance. A few minutes later, police officers opened the door. After her release, Barbara immediately called Beverly to hear the voices of both her sister and her son. They were overjoyed that she had managed to escape. However, despite the happy reunion, Barbara was still troubled by the fact that Paul was still at large and could return to harm her. Her nightmare could not truly end as long as he remained free. Fortunately, she did not suffer serious physical injuries during her kidnapping, but the psychological effects left her deeply affected. Barbara experienced post-traumatic stress disorder for a long time. She credited her faith in God for helping her family heal and chose to forgive Paul in order to find peace moving forward. By November 17, law enforcement had learned that a patrol officer, Charles Campbell, was missing and suspected he might have been abducted by Paul. The officer had attempted to stop a vehicle and approach the driver's window, but he was too late and saw a weapon aimed at Charles. Paul kidnapped Charles and took the patrol car, leaving behind Barbara's car. Shortly after, the police vehicle was found abandoned on the roadside while Paul was trying to stop another driver, James Mayer. Now, Paul had two hostages, whom he later transferred to another vehicle after killing the driver. About 100 kilometers into Georgia, a gas station employee noticed a man in uniform acting strangely in the back seat of one of the vehicles that had pulled in. He promptly alerted emergency services. After the vehicle left, the employee reported his observations, which helped law enforcement identify the car and its location. They initiated a chase and managed to intercept the vehicle. However, Paul refused to stop, even with flat tires. Driving on flat tires didn't last long. He lost control and crashed into a barrier. Paul abandoned the vehicle and fled into the woods. The police chased him closely, and explosions were heard from the forest. Despite this, Paul managed to escape again. The following day, a hunter saw Paul in the woods. He noticed that Paul was injured and reported the sighting to the authorities. Eventually, Paul was captured and refused to reveal the location of Charles and James, the driver of a stolen car. On December 18, about a month after their abduction, they were found tied to a tree in Georgia, both dead from wounds inflicted by a weapon. News of Paul, the most dangerous serial killer, spread on television, bringing relief to Barbara and her family. She had spent over a day in captivity and fully realized the threat the detectives were facing. Barbara remembered that he had escaped from prison before and feared it could happen again, leaving her and her family feeling unsafe for a while. They moved in with relatives, but this offered little comfort to Barbara. Barbara understood that she could only find peace if Paul could never harm anyone again. During this time, she faced significant psychological struggles. On the way to prison, Paul had a devious plan in mind. He was placed in the sheriff's car, and they drove to the location. The driver and accompanying officer were unaware that Paul had a paperclip with him. During the drive, Paul waited for a moment when the officers were distracted and managed to pick the lock on his handcuffs. A struggle broke out, and he seized the officer's weapon. Fortunately, the sheriff reacted quickly. He attacked Paul, emptying his entire magazine, realizing that both were in mortal danger and only decisive action could save their lives. Paul had died. This news brought immense relief to Barbara, her family, and many others who had been anxiously following the villain's actions across the country. Finally, he could no longer pose a threat, allowing everyone to breathe a sigh of relief. After much contemplation, Barbara ultimately decided to stay in her home instead of moving. Although she was going through a difficult time, the house held memories of her mother and the joyful moments of her childhood. Among these memories was her miraculous escape from one of the most dangerous serial killers in the U.S. during the 1970s. As she worked to heal from her trauma, Barbara married Jim Abel. Despite the challenges she faced, including surviving cancer, she raised Dale. Motivated by her experiences and perhaps Paul's quest for notoriety, Barbara wrote a book detailing her abduction from her own perspective. She vividly described the horrors she faced with the killer and focused on the strategies she used to escape the fate that befell many of his victims. Sadly, her sister Beverly, who passed away from cancer in 2019, never had the chance to read Barbara's book, published in 2021, but Beverly was involved in the early stages of its creation and supported her sister throughout the process. As it turned out, besides Barbara, there was another survivor named Sandy Fox, who was also a writer. There is a theory that Paul intentionally left these two women alive so they could write books about him and make him famous.
On December 8, 2019, a man emerged from Koyan Junction railway station carrying a large, heavy black bag. Koyan Junction is a major railway station on the central line of the Mumbai Suburban Railway Network, located at the junction of the northeastern and southeastern lines of the Mumbai Suburban Division of the Central Railway, 54 kilometers northeast of Mumbai. At 5:15 a.m., dawn was just breaking and the sun had not yet risen. Despite the early hour, Koyan Junction is always busy because it operates 24 hours a day with trains arriving and departing constantly. As a result, many auto rickshaws are typically waiting outside the station, especially during nighttime. In India, auto rickshaws are motorized versions of traditional manually pulled or cycle rickshaws. They are usually owned and operated by private individuals. A man with a heavy black bag approached an auto rickshaw driver outside the station and asked for a ride to Bhiwandi. The distance from Koyan Junction to Bhiwandi was only 3 miles and would take approximately 15 minutes. However, the rickshaw driver immediately noticed a terrible smell coming from the man's bag. The man said he had some rotten vegetables in his bag that he planned to throw into the river on the way. The smell was so strong that the rickshaw driver refused to take him to Bhiwandi. The man walked over to another nearby auto rickshaw driver to see if he would take him as a passenger. He left his heavy bag next to the fifth rickshaw driver because it was too difficult to carry. While waiting, rickshaw driver started to wonder why the man had put rotten vegetables in a brand new bag. If the vegetables were spoiled, wouldn't he usually just use a plastic bag? The rickshaw driver noticed that the bag emitted a smell similar to that of a butcher shop where meat is prepared. The man convinced an auto rickshaw driver to take him, but the driver only agreed to the ride for 180 Indian rupees, which is about $2, because of the foul odor coming from the bag. Normally, the fare from Koyan railway station to Bhiwandi is just 80 rupees, or about $1. The first driver nearby overheard this and was surprised that he would pay more than double the usual fare. This made the driver suspicious, so he asked the man to open the bag. Upon hearing the rickshaw driver's words, the man became nervous and didn't respond. Instead, he instructed the second auto rickshaw driver to start driving. However, the second driver also found him suspicious and refused to take him. A tense situation developed outside the railway station. The first driver then called the police. When the man saw this, he panicked, left his bag behind, and bolted toward Koyan railway station, disappearing from sight. Meanwhile, other auto rickshaw drivers outside the station called the police to report the abandoned bag and the foul odor coming from it. After the call, police quickly arrived at the railway station. The auto rickshaw driver reported that a man had approached him with a smelly bag, but when he had asked him to open it, he had run away. Alarmed, the police instructed everyone to back off. They then opened the black bag in front of the crowd. As soon as the bag was unzipped, everyone present, both auto rickshaw drivers and police officers, was struck with fear. It was likely the first time any of them had seen such a terrifying sight. Even some of the officers were witnessing something this gruesome for the first time in their careers. Inside the bag were the severed lower half of a human body, specifically, human legs. From the start, the police identified the dismembered body as belonging to a woman based on its physical characteristics. They promptly sent the body part to a nearby hospital for an autopsy and DNA testing. However, since the body was missing its head, it was very challenging to establish what the deceased woman might have looked like or what her facial features were. The pathologists quickly informed the police that the woman's body had been dismembered with a weapon that had sharp, serrated edges. They noted scratches on her thighs and observed that the area where her torso had been separated was cut in a rough, uneven way. This led them to believe that a handsaw was likely used in the dismemberment. The police discovered from the pathologist examining the body that the girl had been murdered 2 to 3 days prior. They estimated her age to be between 20 and 25 years. At the same time, the police struggled to identify the unclaimed body. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the crime branch, also known as the Crime Investigation Department, joined the investigation. Afterward, the Koyan police stepped up their investigation and decided to interview the auto rickshaw drivers who had first noticed the bag and alerted them. When the police spoke with first driver and his fellow drivers, they learned that the person who placed the black bag near the railway station was wearing a red shirt and khaki pants, and had a white cloth wrapped around his head. Since this unidentified individual had left Koyan railway station, the police and the crime branch team quickly requested CCTV footage from all cameras at the station. The police then organized a large team to analyze all the camera footage, focusing on the time frame from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. on December 8th. After several hours of searching, some officers finally spotted the man in the red shirt on one of the station's cameras. To their surprise, he wasn't alone. Another man in a pink shirt was also seen holding the bag as they both exited the station together. However, the first driver and the other auto rickshaw drivers reported that only one person had approached them. When the officers shared the CCTV footage with the drivers, they recognized the man in the video as the one who had delivered the black bag to them. They also informed the police that when they called the police emergency number in front of that man, he became frightened and ran back inside the railway station. This led the police to review more CCTV footage. In another CCTV footage, a man wearing a red shirt was spotted running on a platform. He entered a restroom, took off his red shirt, and put on a different shirt. This change was probably made to avoid being recognized, although he kept his khaki-colored pants on. When he left the restroom, he walked casually, trying to appear nonchalant. By this point, he had likely boarded a train and escaped, which posed a new challenge for the police. They needed to identify this man and find out where he had come from. The officers speculated that he was likely local to Koyan City, as it would be unusual for someone to carry a heavy bag containing human legs over a distance of 100 to 150 miles just to dispose of it. After the suspect left Koyan railway station at around 5 a.m., the police collaborated with railway officials to determine how many trains had stopped there around that time and their origins. They discovered that 3 trains had arrived at the station within a 20-minute window, 10 minutes before and 10 minutes after 5 a.m. The police then traced these trains back to their previous stops. At that point, only half of the girl's body had been found. The police believed that if the murderer had placed her legs in a black bag, he might have dismembered the rest of her body and disposed of it in another black bag elsewhere. Consequently, they issued a public alert asking people to report any abandoned bags immediately. They also contacted their informants to check if any girls aged 20 to 25 had recently been reported missing in the nearby areas. The police continued their search for the man seen in CCTV footage from 3 different railway stations. Their efforts paid off when they spotted a man in a red shirt at Tivala railway station around 4 a.m., waiting for a train. He was carrying the same large, heavy black bag. He had received help from a man in a pink shirt at Kalyan railway station. The two stations are about 9 miles apart, so it was clear that he couldn't have walked the entire distance with such a heavy bag. He must have used some form of public transportation. The police decided to question the auto rickshaw drivers waiting outside the station. They used screenshots from the CCTV footage to show each driver and asked if any of them had dropped a man off at the railway station with a large bag. While the man's face was unclear in the images, his clothing was distinctive. One of the auto rickshaw drivers outside Tivala railway station recognized the photo and approached the police, stating that he was the one who dropped the person off at the station in the early hours of December 8th. When the police inquired where he had picked up the man, the driver explained that there was a place in Tivala called Indiranagar, where the man had been standing on one of the roads. He said that when the man saw his auto rickshaw, he had flagged him down and asked for a ride to the railway station. He mentioned that the man had a very large bag that he couldn't lift by himself, so he helped him load it into his rickshaw. After that, he stated that he had dropped the man off at Tivala railway station as he had requested. Upon receiving this information, the police quickly went to the spot where the driver had picked up the man. On their way to Indiranagar, they got an important call from an informant. The informant shared that the man who left the black bag at Kalyan railway station, the same person they had been tracking through CCTV footage, actually lived in a chawl in Indiranagar. This news surprised the officers because the chawl was very close to where they were. Without delay, the police team changed direction and headed toward the chawl. During the investigation, they learned that in India, a chawl is a form of low-cost housing commonly located in densely populated areas with limited living space. The police found a girl around 13 or 14 years old who was in the 6th grade. They showed her a photo of a man in a red shirt and asked her if she recognized him, suggesting that he might live around there. Although the man's face was not very clear in the photo, the girl identified him by his clothing and hairstyle, stating that the uncle looked like Arvind uncle. The police then asked her where Arvind uncle lived. After obtaining his flat number, they went to his apartment but found the door locked from the outside. The officers felt disappointed, as they had not yet located the man despite their efforts. Rather than give up, they decided to interview Arvind's neighbors. During these conversations, the police also showed some of the neighbors the CCTV footage from the railway station. From this, they learned that the man's full name was Arvind Tiwari and that he worked as a manager at a transportation company called Pawan Hans Logistics. However, after speaking with the neighbors a little longer, the police discovered that Arvind Tiwari had a daughter who lived with him, but she hadn't been seen in the past 2 to 3 days. This raised concerns for the police. Not only was Arvind missing with his house locked, but his daughter had also not been seen for days. As the pieces of the puzzle started coming together, their suspicions about Arvind deepened, and they grew increasingly worried about his daughter. Because of this, the police went to the transportation company where Arvind worked to look for him. They found Arvind Tiwari there at the time. The first question the officers asked him upon seeing him was, "Where is his daughter?" The moment he heard this, a trace of tension appeared on his face, and the police immediately sensed that Arvind was hiding many secrets. Sensing this, the officers took Arvind to the police station for questioning, away from the rest of the company's employees. Even there, the police repeated their question about his daughter. However, at first, he continued lying, saying, his daughter has gone to the village to meet her mom and sisters. After hearing this, the police realized that Arvind himself would not tell the truth. Because of this, they showed him the CCTV footage in which he was captured. When the police asked him about the black bag, he broke down and then confessed his crime, admitting that he himself killed his daughter. The legs recovered from the bag belonged to his 22-year-old daughter, Princy Tiwari. After this, Arvind voluntarily recounted the entire story behind why he killed his daughter. Arvind Tiwari, 47 years old, was originally from Jaunpur, Uttar Pradesh, a city about 915 km away from Kalyan. Besides him, his wife and 4 daughters also lived in Jaunpur, with Princey being the eldest among them. In early 2016, Arvind moved from Jaunpur to Malad in search of work. During this time, in June 2019, his eldest daughter Princey completed her graduation and moved in with her father to pursue a better future. Princey decided that she wanted to get a job to financially support her father and the rest of the family. Within a few days of arriving, she began looking for a job at a local company. Soon, she found success and secured a small position at a private firm not far from home. However, about 2 to 3 months later, in October or November 2019, Princey informed her father that she was in love with a boy and wanted to marry him. However, Arvind Tiwari was an old-fashioned man, one could call him a conservative father. When he found out that the boy his daughter wanted to marry was from a different caste, he outright refused the marriage. On the other hand, Princey was adamant that she would only marry him. Arvind was unwilling to accept this marriage because he believed that if he married his daughter into another caste, people in society would say a lot of things against him. Besides, he still had to arrange the marriages of his 3 other daughters, and if Princey married outside their caste, it would create difficulties for 3 other daughters' marriages as well. With Princey insisting on marrying the same guy and her father Arvind equally adamant about stopping the marriage, arguments between father and daughter began to occur from time to time. On the evening of December 6, 2019, after both Arvind and Princey returned home from their respective work, another argument broke out. However, this time the argument escalated to the point where, in anger, Princey consumed rat poison, causing her to lose consciousness. At this point, it is unclear whether Princey consumed the rat poison herself or if Arvind, exerting control over her, deliberately made her drink it. In fact, the police believe that Arvind had mixed the poison into his daughter's food, and as soon as Princey ate it, she lost consciousness. Arvind Tiwari insisted to the police that Princey had taken the poison by herself. However, this raised an important question: if Arvind was honest, why didn't he take her to a hospital or doctor right away? The facts show that Princey was left unconscious in their home throughout the night, and instead of seeking help, Arvind chose to go to sleep. When he woke up on the morning of December 7th, he found that Princey had stopped breathing and had died from the poisoning. Seeing this, Arvind became extremely anxious and decided to dismantle his daughter's body to hide it in faraway places or rivers. He thought that if he did this, the police would never find Princey's body, and he wouldn't be caught. That morning, Arvind went to the market and bought 2 large bags and a handsaw. He returned home and, in his small room, cut his daughter's body into 3 parts. He removed her head from her torso and then separated the torso from the legs. He placed the legs in one bag, the torso along with both hands in another bag. This horrifying task took him all day. When night arrived, he took the bag containing his daughter's torso out of his room. He used public transportation and convinced an auto rickshaw driver to take him to his desired location by claiming he was carrying rotten vegetables. On the way, he discarded the bag into a river in Titvala. The next morning, December 8th, Arvind left again, this time with a bag containing the lower half of his daughter's body. He first arrived at Titvala railway station and then took a train to Kalyan railway station. After getting off the train with the heavy bag, a passerby noticed Arvind struggling and offered to help. The man, wearing a pink shirt, assisted Arvind in lifting the bag and carried it outside the railway station before departing. Later, police confirmed that the passerby seen in the CCTV footage was not the murderer. He had simply helped Arvind with his luggage. The police tracked him down to his home, where he reiterated that he had no knowledge of the contents of the bag and only provided assistance. Following this, the police took Arvind with them as they searched for Princey's upper body and head. Arvind admitted that he had thrown the bag containing Princey's torso into the Ulhas River, leading the police to follow the river in hopes of finding it. On December 11th, they located the bag in the Ulhas River. Subsequently, the police turned their attention to finding Princey's head. Arvind guided them to the place where he had disposed of it. Despite searching for several days, they could not find the head. However, they did recover the handsaw used in the murder from the area Arvind had pointed out. While her head remained missing, forensic scientists were able to verify through DNA testing that the body was indeed that of Princey Tiwari. A father had brutally killed his own daughter simply because she had fallen in love with a boy from another caste and wanted to marry him. Now, Arvind Tiwari is in police custody. By committing this murder, he has not only ruined his own life but also the lives of his 4 daughters and his wife. In the end, this man will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The murder of Princey Tiwari by her father, Arvind Tiwari, in Titvala, India, revealed the devastating toll of caste-based prejudices. Arvind's refusal to accept Princey's inter-caste marriage led to her poisoning and the gruesome disposal of her remains in the Ulhas River. Arrested and charged under Section 302 of the Indian Penal Code, Arvind faces life imprisonment, likely with additional penalties for tampering with evidence. While justice awaits final sentencing, the tragedy has shattered Princey's family and sparked calls for reform, urging India to confront rigid traditions that fuel such irreversible losses. In the heart of Sydney's central business district, where towering skyscrapers define the skyline and the city pulses with activity, a devastating crime unfolded on August 13, 2019, claiming the life of Michaela Dunn. 3 years earlier, on May 14, 2016, in the vibrant suburb of Parramatta, a brutal assault left Dasha Volnukin deeply traumatized, with her death in May 2018 adding to the sorrow. These incidents, occurring in modern urban settings, shocked their communities and sparked widespread concern about safety in Australia's cities, particularly for those in vulnerable professions like escorting. The stories of Michaela and Dasha, though distinct, highlight the hidden dangers faced by escort profession and the urgent need for systemic protections. Michaela Dunn, a 24-year-old Sydney resident, was tragically murdered in 2019, leaving her family, friends, and community grappling with profound loss. Her death underscored the risks that can persist even in environments designed for security, challenging assumptions about urban safety. Similarly, Dasha Volnukin, a 22-year-old Ukrainian model who had moved to Australia in 2015, endured a horrific assault that marked her life with lasting trauma. Her resilience in reporting the crime led to justice, but her untimely death 2 years later deepened the tragedy. On August 13, 2019, at approximately 1:30 p.m., police received an urgent call about a violent incident in a high-rise apartment on Clarence Street, a bustling thoroughfare in Sydney's CBD lined with corporate offices and residential complexes. Emergency services arrived promptly, discovering a distressing scene inside a modern apartment building. Forensic investigators cordoned off the area, documenting evidence of a struggle, such as disarrayed furniture and personal items. Neighbors reported hearing disturbances, but the building's soundproofed walls obscured critical details, complicating initial inquiries. The investigation revealed that Michaela had been fatally wounded, her body bearing a severe neck injury that marked the brutality of the attack. 3 years earlier, on May 14, 2016, at 1:30 a.m., a similar tragedy struck in Parramatta, a dynamic suburb 25 kilometers west of Sydney's CBD, known for its rich cultural diversity and thriving commercial scene. Dasha Volnukin faced a terrifying assault in a residential unit. The incident unfolded discreetly, leaving few immediate clues. Security footage captured a man, later identified as Mustafa Kairisai, 28, entering and exiting the building, but provided no direct evidence of the violence that transpired inside. Dasha's prompt reporting to police, including detailed descriptions of her assailant, was crucial in advancing the investigation, despite the private nature of the crime. Michaela and Dasha, both young women in their early 20s, lived in Sydney, residing in apartments equipped with modern security features. The fact that these violent acts occurred in private, supposedly safe spaces stunned local residents and prompted extensive police investigations. Authorities worked diligently to establish timelines, interview potential witnesses, and determine whether the cases were connected. While no direct link was confirmed, Both women worked as escorts, a legal but high-risk profession in Australia, which emerged as a significant commonality. This shared profession highlighted the vulnerabilities inherent in escort profession, where financial independence comes at the cost of exposure to potential danger. To fully appreciate the impact of these events, it's essential to understand Michaela and Dasha as individuals with unique aspirations and challenges. Their lives, though cut short by tragedy, reflect the complexities of navigating personal and professional choices in a fast-paced, high-cost city like Sydney. Michaela Dunn was a proud Sydney native, raised in inner West Sydney, a region celebrated for its close-knit communities and eclectic atmosphere. By 2019, she had entered the escort industry, a decision that offered financial independence in Sydney's competitive economy. Escorting, while legal in New South Wales, can provide significant earnings, enabling flexibility and opportunities like travel. Michaela's choice to keep her work private was likely influenced by societal stigma, which is a common practice among escorts to protect their personal relationships. Friends remembered her as a compassionate and resilient individual, whose warmth left a lasting impression on those around her. Her engagement with Sydney's vibrant cultural scenes, from art galleries to nightlife, reflected a young woman embracing the city's dynamic spirit. Dasha Volnukin, born in Canada, arrived in Australia in 2015, drawn to Sydney's cosmopolitan allure and economic prospects. At 22, she worked as a model and escort, roles that showcased her confidence and adaptability. Her move to Australia was driven by a desire for new opportunities, but the challenges of building a life in a new country were significant. Dasha's decision to enter the escort industry was kept discreet, likely to avoid judgment in a society that often stigmatizes escort. Friends described her as empathetic and determined, qualities that helped her navigate the complexities of migration and work. Her brief tenure as an escort exposed her to rapid risks, culminating in the traumatic assault that would shape her final years. Both Michaela and Dasha pursued escorting to achieve financial stability and shape their futures in Sydney's demanding environment. The promise of autonomy in a city with high living costs was compelling, yet their profession brought them into contact with dangerous individuals. These incidents underscore the vulnerabilities inherent in escort, despite its legality, and highlight the need for enhanced protections to ensure worker safety. The events leading to these tragedies began with Michaela's murder on August 13, 2019. That day, Sydney's CBD was alive with midday activity, its streets filled with office workers and visitors. In her Clarence Street apartment, designed with modern security measures for young professionals, Michaela prepared to meet a client for a routine appointment. The client, Mert Ney, entered the building mid-afternoon, passing through standard entry protocols. What began as a typical booking turned deadly when Ney attacked Michaela, inflicting a fatal neck wound. He fled via the fire stairs, bloodied, leaving behind evidence of the crime. Police found Michaela deceased in her apartment, a space intended as a sanctuary, revealing a shocking breach of safety. On May 14, 2016, Dasha faced her own harrowing ordeal in a Parramatta residential unit. Arranging a client visit, she met Mustafa Kairisai, who appeared unremarkable upon entry. Inside the apartment, Kairisai turned violent, threatening Dasha with a knife, blindfolding her, and binding her with duct tape. He abused her and forced her to shower, attempting to erase evidence. Dasha survived by complying, but the trauma was profound. After Kairisai fled, she reported the incident to police, providing critical details that aided the investigation. The building's modern design and privacy features limited witness accounts, posing challenges for authorities, but Dasha's courage in reporting the crime was pivotal. Both Michaela and Dasha encountered clients who transformed private meetings into violent ordeals, exposing the inherent dangers of their profession. These incidents, occurring in secure urban settings, challenged assumptions about safety in modern cities and sparked public discourse about the risks faced by sex workers. The investigation into Michaela's death began swiftly on August 13, 2019, at her Clarence Street apartment. Police discovered her body with a fatal neck injury, and forensic teams meticulously collected evidence, including traces of the struggle. Security footage revealed Mert Ney, aged 21, entering the building at 1:30 p.m. and fleeing bloodied at 1:50 p.m., brandishing a knife. Nay's erratic behavior on Clarence Street alarmed pedestrians, leading bystanders to pursue him with improvised tools, a chair and a milk crate, restraining him near Wynyard Lane until police arrested him at 2 p.m. A USB drive containing violent material was recovered, but no terrorist motives were confirmed. Nay, unemployed and residing in Blacktown, had documented mental health struggles, which police noted as a potential factor, though his intent remained unclear. A search of his Blacktown residence provided further context, suggesting financial distress may have contributed to his actions. Dasha's assault investigation progressed due to her immediate report on May 14, 2016. She described her assailant's appearance and actions, which, combined with CCTV footage from the Parramatta unit, helped police identify Kairisai. The footage showed Kairisai entering and exiting calmly, offering no hint of the violence inside. Police canvassed Parramatta, but the building's security measures limited witness accounts. Dasha's description aligned with other assault reports, leading to Kairisai's arrest on May 28, 2016, in Bondi after a pursuit. He was linked to multiple attacks on escorts in 2016, indicating a pattern of predatory behavior. Mert Nay, responsible for Michaela's murder, had a troubled background marked by unemployment and mental health issues. Living in crisis housing in Blacktown in 2019, he faced significant personal challenges, including financial instability and untreated mental health conditions. His arrest initiated legal proceedings for murder, attempted murder of another individual, Lynn Bowe, aged 41, and related offenses. No clear motive was established, with his actions attributed to a combination of mental instability and situational factors. Mustafa Kairisai, born around 1985, targeted escorts in Sydney during 2016. Court records indicate his attacks were planned, exploiting the vulnerabilities of escort. On May 14, he abused Dasha, using a knife to intimidate her and employing tactics like blindfolding and binding to control the situation. Similar incidents in the CBD and Parramatta suggested a deliberate pattern. Kairisai's defense claimed his actions were influenced by personal issues, but evidence of premeditation prevailed. He faced multiple charges, reflecting the severity of his crimes. The cases of Mert Nay and Mustafa Kairisai illustrate divergent pathways to violence, each underscoring unique challenges in addressing crime in urban Australia. Nay's attack on Michaela was a chaotic, impulsive act, seemingly driven by personal distress and mental health struggles, reflecting a life marked by instability. In contrast, Kairisai's assault on Dasha was systematic and predatory, exploiting the vulnerabilities of sex workers in a calculated manner. Their arrests marked the beginning of legal efforts to hold them accountable for the harm inflicted on Michaela, Dasha, and others. The legal proceedings for Dasha's case unfolded at Sydney's Downing Centre District Court, focusing on the May 14, 2016, assault and related crimes. Prosecutors presented Dasha's testimony, which detailed the harrowing ordeal, alongside CCTV footage from the Parramatta unit that corroborated her account. The evidence highlighted Kairisai's methodical tactics, including his use of a knife and attempts to erase evidence. The defense argued that Kairisai's actions were influenced by personal circumstances, but the prosecution emphasized his intent to harm. Dasha passed away in May 2018, 2 years after the assault. Her loss deepened the sorrow felt by her friends and community, who remembered her as a vibrant, resilient individual. Tributes highlighted her determination and warmth, qualities that shone through despite the trauma she endured. Her work as a model and her efforts to build a life in Australia reflected a young woman full of promise, making her death all the more poignant. Mert Nay's trial, following his August 2019 arrest, was a significant undertaking at the Downing Centre District Court. Prosecutors argued that Nay's actions were premeditated, pointing to his possession of a knife and his behavior after the crime, which included fleeing bloodied and brandishing the weapon in public. Justice Peter Johnson, presiding over the case, described the attack as exceptionally brutal, noting its devastating impact on Michaela's family and community. Nay's defense team highlighted his mental health struggles, including untreated conditions that may have contributed to his actions. However, evidence of his awareness during the crime undermined these arguments. On May 14, 2021, Ney was sentenced to 44 years in prison with a 33-year non-parole period, reflecting the severity of the offense. In October 2023, an appeal reduced his sentence to 40 years with a 30-year non-parole period, acknowledging procedural considerations while maintaining significant accountability. In 2022, Ney pleaded guilty to assaulting a guard at Goulburn Correctional Center, receiving a concurrent sentence that did not extend his overall term, raising questions about managing ongoing risks posed by incarcerated individuals. Sydney's CBD, a vibrant hub of commerce and culture, and Parramatta, a multicultural suburb undergoing rapid urban renewal, served as the backdrops for these tragedies. Michaela's apartment on Clarence Street, located near iconic landmarks like the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Parramatta unit where Dasha was assaulted, represented modern urban living with advanced security features. Yet, these settings failed to protect Michaela and Dasha, exposing a stark paradox: private spaces, designed for safety, can become sites of extreme violence. This contradiction fueled public discourse about urban safety and the vulnerabilities inherent in certain professions, particularly escort. The escort industry in Australia, legally recognized in New South Wales since 1995, operates within a complex and often challenging landscape. Escorts, whether working independently or through agencies, can earn substantial incomes, particularly in high-cost cities like Sydney, where living expenses drive many to seek lucrative opportunities. Michaela and Dasha's decisions to enter this field likely stemmed from the need for financial independence in a competitive economy. Escorting offers flexibility and the potential for significant earnings, with hourly rates in Sydney often ranging from $300 to $1,000, depending on services and clientele. However, the industry's risks, violence, stigma, and inadequate safety measures place workers in precarious positions. Unlike other professions, escorting lacks standardized protections, such as mandatory client screening, accessible emergency support systems, or comprehensive training on risk management. These gaps were evident in Michaela and Dasha's cases, where private meetings with clients turned deadly or traumatic, highlighting the urgent need for reform. Police investigations into both cases relied on established methods for urban crime, including security footage, witness statements, and victim reports. The rapid arrest of Mert Ney on August 13, 2019, demonstrated the power of community intervention. Bystanders, witnessing Ney's erratic behavior on Clarence Street, courageously restrained him using a chair and a milk crate, preventing further harm until police arrived. Their actions became a symbol of community resilience, widely covered by Australian media, and sparked discussions about the role of civilians in public safety. Dasha's prompt and detailed report on May 14, 2016, was equally critical, enabling police to identify Mustafa Kairisai through CCTV and her descriptions. However, the scarcity of witnesses in modern residential buildings, designed with privacy in mind, posed significant challenges. In Parramatta, the unit's security measures limited external accounts, complicating efforts to corroborate Dasha's testimony and underscoring a broader issue in investigating private space crimes. Serial offender Mustafa Kairisai was sentenced to 34 years in prison in August 2021 for 30 counts of abuse, abuse assault, and child abuse, having abuse assaulted a schoolgirl over 5 hours at 10 locations in 2016. He received an additional 38-year sentence for the abuse and robbery of 7 other women in the same year, including Dasha Volnukin. In 2021, Kairisai was given just 12 months to live after being diagnosed with an undisclosed terminal illness and undergoing chemotherapy in prison. Had he survived, he would not have been eligible for release until 2066. Correctional Services NSW confirmed that 31-year-old Kairisai died in the high-security prison block at Prince of Wales Hospital in January 2022. Australia's legal system, grounded in common law principles, delivered verdicts in both cases, but the outcomes revealed systemic challenges. Ney's 40-year sentence, adjusted on appeal in October 2023, and Kairisai's 72-year sentence in 2021 provided a measure of accountability, yet the prolonged trials and complex defenses, particularly Ney's mental health arguments, delayed resolution for the victims' families. The economic realities of Sydney, one of the world's most expensive cities, played a significant role in Michaela and Dasha's choices. With median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in the CBD exceeding $700 per week in 2019, and living costs rising steadily, many young people turn to high-paying industries like escorting to afford a comfortable lifestyle. This economic pressure, combined with the flexibility of escort profession, makes it an attractive option, yet the lack of regulatory oversight leaves workers exposed to exploitation and violence. Comparative data from other decriminalized jurisdictions, such as New Zealand, suggests that mandatory client registries and worker support networks can reduce violence, offering a model for Australia to consider. Implementing such measures could address the systemic vulnerabilities exposed by these cases, ensuring that financial necessity does not come at the cost of safety. The role of technology in these investigations also warrants examination. CCTV footage was pivotal in both cases, providing visual evidence that linked Nay and Kiirasai to the crime scenes. However, the limitations of surveillance in private spaces, where cameras are restricted to common areas like lobbies, highlight a gap in evidence collection. Balancing technological innovation with civil liberties is a critical challenge for Australian law enforcement, particularly in high-density urban areas where crimes often occur behind closed doors. The legacy of Michaela Dunn and Dasha Volnukin serves as a powerful call to action. Their stories, though marked by loss, highlight the resilience of individuals and communities in the face of adversity. Michaela's vibrant engagement with Sydney's cultural life and Dasha's determination to build a new life in Australia reflect young women full of potential, whose lives were cut short by preventable violence. By addressing the systemic issues exposed by their cases, urban safety gaps, escort vulnerabilities, mental health deficiencies, and sentencing disparities, Australia can honor their memory through meaningful change. Enhanced protections, better support systems, and a commitment to equity can ensure that no one else faces such preventable harm, creating safer, more inclusive communities for all. On October 19, 2021, a cool autumn day in Wood Street, Kettering, a peaceful market town in Northamptonshire. Wood Street, with its simple homes and ghost houses, was alive with the usual sounds of everyday life, neighbors chatting, cars passing by, children returning home from school. But just after noon, that tranquility was shattered. Marta Kmieleka, a 31-year-old woman whose life was cut short, leaving her community in turmoil and her family forever altered. Northamptonshire police received a call expressing concern for a person's welfare at a residence on Wood Street. A family member had not heard from their loved one for several days and sensed that something was wrong. Officers arrived expecting to conduct a routine welfare check. They forced their way into a rented room and discovered a scene that initiated one of the town's most disturbing crime investigations. Marta was dead. The small, cluttered room was filled with secrets that would take months to uncover. What happened here? The police cordoned off the street, and neighbors watched in shock as forensic teams arrived. Residents from nearby told reporters they had never witnessed anything like this in Kettering. A neighbor expressed his disbelief. Wood Street was meant to be a safe place where nothing significant ever occurred. To reconstruct the timeline of Marta's last hours, investigators analyzed surveillance footage, which became a key piece of evidence. Detectives focused on a crucial time, the night of October 15th, just 4 days before Marta's body was discovered. So, who was she? Marta was a lively, kind, and independent woman who greatly impacted those around her. Marta grew up in Bydgoszcz, a vibrant city in northern Poland known for its charming riverside and close-knit communities. Her family considered her full of life, always smiling, and eager to help. Marta had a special ability to make people feel valued, whether she was assisting a neighbor with groceries or enjoying long conversations with friends over coffee. Her brother and sister-in-law, who later spoke at her inquest, described her as the glue of their family, someone who was always ready to help without needing to be asked. In Poland, Marta had a strong relationship with her parents, especially her father. Friends referred to her as a daddy's girl, not because she was spoiled, but because of the close and unwavering bond they had. She would call her father just to share her day. He listened with pride as he watched her grow into a confident woman. Marta also loved her brother's children and took her aunt duty seriously. She would spoil them with small gifts, play with them, or simply listen to their stories. Her family said she had a natural warmth that made everyone feel valued. At around 25 years old, Marta met Powell Kmialecki, who was a few years her senior. Powell was charming, confident, and had a passion for cars, particularly BMWs, which he loved to showcase. Powell was drawn to her lively personality. Their friends noted that they seemed like an ideal couple. Marta's outgoing nature balanced Powell's more reserved demeanor. They bonded over common interests like music, weekend trips, and dreams of a life outside of Poland. For Marta, who was always eager to explore and ambitious, Powell appeared to be a partner who shared her aspirations for new adventures. Their relationship progressed quickly. After dating for a couple of years, they were ready to move forward. On July 29, 2016, Marta and Powell married in a small, joyful ceremony in Bydgoszcz. The day was filled with family, laughter, and Polish traditions. Marta's family, especially her father, was delighted to see her so happy. The couple settled into their married life by renting an apartment in Bydgoszcz. For a while, it seemed like the life Marta had dreamed of, stable, loving, and aimed at a bright future. Marta and Powell had ambitious goals. They sought more than what Bydgoszcz could provide. They wanted opportunities for personal growth, better earnings, and a chance to immerse themselves in a new culture. In 2017, they decided to take a significant step. They moved to England. They chose Kettering, a small town in Northamptonshire, partly because Marta's brother and his family already lived there. This move was a big leap for them. They packed their belongings, said farewells to their families, and arrived in the UK with optimism. Kettering, with its peaceful streets and supportive Polish community, felt like the perfect place for a fresh start. They rented a home together, explored their new surroundings, began building a new life. They enjoyed their time in Kettering by going for walks and visiting local cafes and bars. Initially, the move seemed to deepen their relationship. Marta embraced her new life in Kettering, finding a job and making friends, while Powell also adapted to his work. They often hosted dinners for Marta's brother and his children, with Marta happily playing the role of an aunt by bringing games and treats. Social media posts from that period captured their joy, showcasing them smiling with each other and sharing captions about their new adventures. Beneath the seemingly perfect moments, problems were emerging. Powell, who had always been somewhat possessive, began to show a controlling behavior that Marta hadn't fully recognized back in Poland. He started questioning her whereabouts, the people she spent time with, and why she was making new friends. Marta, who valued her independence, struggled with being monitored. She wanted to live freely, not just exist under Powell's watch. As time passed, Powell's jealousy intensified. He was no longer just protective, he had become obsessive. While Marta was flourishing and expanding her social network within Kettering's Polish community, Powell couldn't cope. He bombarded her with texts to find out her plans and would often show up unexpectedly where she was with friends. Those around her noticed that she didn't seem like herself anymore. Her usual vibrancy had faded. While Marta shrugged it off, saying Powell was just stressed or adjusting to life in England, her close friends could see the underlying tension. Though Marta always wore a smile, her family later revealed that she had spoken to them about Powell's behavior, hinting at arguments that left her feeling trapped. The tension between Powell and Marta escalated from emotional to physical abuse. Court records later showed 3 incidents of Powell's aggression toward Marta, one in August 2020, another during Easter 2021, and a third in September 2021, just weeks before the tragedy. These incidents were not isolated, they were part of a recurring pattern. Though always a strong-willed person, Marta began to fear the man she once loved. She confided in friends that she no longer recognized Powell. She felt suffocated by his jealousy. Despite her fears, she stayed with him, perhaps hoping for change or feeling burdened by their shared past. Powell's controlling behavior extended beyond their home as he harassed Marta's friends and tried to monitor her whereabouts, even stalking her by appearing at her workplace or waiting outside places she visited. By mid-2020, their marriage was falling apart. Marta moved out and found her own place in Kettering, determined to rebuild her life. She began to share her journey of personal growth on social media. Just 5 days before her life ended, she posted a photo with a caption in Polish: "One of the worst mistakes a person can make is wasting years of life waiting for another person to change or develop." This bold statement signified her desire to move on. She started dating again, forming a new relationship with a colleague and planning a future without Powell. Powell was not willing to let Marta go. He continued to text, call, and try to involve himself in her life, even as she tried to distance herself from him. Marta repeatedly pleaded with Powell through messages, asking him to stop contacting her. During their investigation, the police found clear evidence of Powell's obsessive behavior. His messages ranged from desperate pleas to threats, showing his refusal to accept that Marta wanted to end things. Her family, especially her brother and sister-in-law, became aware of her increasing discomfort. When she visited them, still remaining a caring aunt to their children, there was a noticeable sadness in her eyes. She was trying to break free, but Powell's presence felt overwhelming. Marta wasn't just ending a marriage, she was escaping from a constraint. The process of breaking up wasn't instantaneous but involved careful, intentional actions. She began by creating distance, reducing contact, and staying away from places where Powell might be. Marta shared her plans to divorce Powell, whose name was on their official marriage registered in Poland, with her brother and sister-in-law who lived nearby. She had started gathering the necessary paperwork, which involved coordinating with lawyers back in Bydgoszcz. Additionally, Marta found support from her friends in Kettering's Polish community. They surrounded her with invitations to dinners, gym sessions, and social outings, helping her reclaim the joy that Powell had suppressed. Powell was unable to let go. His jealousy, which had already caused him pain, developed into an obsession. He refused to accept that his relationship with Marta was over and continued to reach out to her despite her efforts to distance herself. Detective Superintendent later observed that Powell's actions became increasingly desperate. He bombarded Marta with calls and texts, sometimes pleading for another chance and at other times accusing her of betrayal. When she blocked his number, he resorted to using different phones or contacting her friends to gather information about her whereabouts. He would frequently appear at her favorite cafes or hang around her workplace, hoping to encounter her unexpectedly. Marta's friends noticed that she was becoming more anxious. She often looked over her shoulder when she was out. His behavior escalated to stalking. He would follow her from a distance, watching her every move, and once trailed her from her workplace to a friend's house, only leaving after being confronted by her friend. Marta confided in her brother that she felt trapped, as if Powell was always nearby. By October 2021, Marta was doing well despite the influence of Powell. She was excitedly planning a Christmas trip to Poland to visit her father, looking forward to her mother's visit to Kettering, and enjoying a new relationship. On Friday, October 15th, she spent the evening with friends, laughing and texting as they enjoyed drinks together at a local bar. She left around 10:40 p.m., looking sharp and confident as always. However, that night, something unexpected happened. On Monday, October 18th, Marta did not show up for work, which was out of character for her. Her colleagues, who were accustomed to her punctuality, became concerned. Her brother also grew anxious when she didn't answer his calls. The situation escalated when Marta's family received a text from her phone that sounded unusual. It was overly formal and lacked her typical warmth, suggesting it was written by someone else. Her sister-in-law, feeling that something was seriously wrong, suspected that Powell might be involved due to his history of controlling behavior. On Tuesday, October 19th, Marta's sister-in-law visited Powell's rented room on Wood Street. When nobody answered the door, her anxiety grew. She called emergency service to express her concerns about Marta's safety and mentioned Powell's previous aggressive behavior. The Northamptonshire police acted quickly, sending officers to perform a welfare check at the location. What they discovered was shocking. The officers forced their way into Powell's room, breaking down the door. Inside, they found Marta's lifeless body wrapped in a blood-stained duvet. She had suffered 32 sharp force injuries, including cuts to her neck, face, shoulders, and chest, with defensive wounds on her right hand, suggesting that she had fought back. Next to her was Powell, bleeding heavily from up to 9 self-inflicted wounds on his throat. The police immediately secured the area and called for paramedics. Marta was pronounced dead at the scene, her hopes for a new life shattered. Powell, still alive, was taken to the hospital. On October 21st, after confirming that his injuries were not life-threatening, Powell Kmielewski was arrested while in his hospital bed. The detective mentioned that Powell was uncooperative during the investigation. He also noted Powell's initial denial of any previous aggression towards Marta. When detectives interviewed Powell, he remained silent and did not provide any explanation for the events that took place in his room. They questioned him about Marta's final days, her unexplained absence from work, and a suspicious text message, but he revealed nothing, adding to the mystery. Questions arose. Why did Marta visit his room that night? Had Powell lured her there? What led to such a tragic outcome? Investigators established a timeline, revealing that Marta had not been seen since October 15th, and her body had likely been in Powell's room for nearly 4 days. During this time, Powell continued with his daily routine as if nothing had happened. A text sent from Marta's phone emerged as a significant clue, indicating that Powell may have attempted to conceal his involvement. Marta's family, particularly her brother and sister-in-law, were devastated. They had warned her to avoid Powell, but none could have anticipated the depths of his desperation. The investigation into Marta's death relied heavily on tangible evidence, with the security camera footage from Wood Street and surrounding areas being the most telling. Northamptonshire police thoroughly searched CCTV and Ring doorbell recordings, which provided a disturbing glimpse into Marta's final moments. On Friday, October 15, 2021, Marta spent the evening at her friend's house on Woodland Court, enjoying herself and having a good time. She was texting, laughing, and sharing flirtatious messages with a colleague she was dating. At the same time, she received persistent messages from Powell, who was urging her to come over to his place and even asked her to bring pizza. The previous day, she had told him off in a message and requested that he leave her alone. Despite this, Powell continued to text her and reached out to a mutual friend to find out if Marta was at here. Upon confirming her location, he decided to act. At 10:42 p.m., Marta left her friend's house, walking alone along Wood Street towards Rockingham Road. Security footage showed her walking confidently, dressed for a night out and carrying a small bag. However, just a few minutes later, around 10:45 p.m., cameras revealed Powell leaving his rented room and heading towards Bath Road, intentionally moving to intersect her path. Powell was recorded leaving his home on Wood Street to find Marta, as noted by Northamptonshire police based on footage from near Wilson Terrace. The video showed a struggle between them. Marta appeared to be walking normally at first but then seemed to resist when Powell grabbed her arm. She stumbled and briefly fell, coughing and unsteady on her feet. Audio from a Ring doorbell captured her labored coughs along with Powell's cold command, "Come on, not far now. Can you hear me?" He was seen forcefully guiding her, at one point lifting her in a bear hug as she struggled to walk. By 10:56 p.m., the low-quality footage showed them entering his house, and that was the last time anyone but Powell saw Marta alive. Inside that room, the situation became increasingly unclear, but Powell's interactions with Marta's phone revealed important information. At 11:01 p.m., just 5 minutes after they arrived, Powell took a photo of Marta lying on the floor. It's uncertain if she was already injured at that time. Approximately 90 minutes later, around 12:30 a.m. on October 16th, he captured images of messages between Marta and her new boyfriend on her phone that confirmed her new relationship. Powell's fixation on Marta's new life, especially her relationship with her new boyfriend, drove his actions. He didn't just spy on her, he went further by using Marta's phone to send messages in an effort to hide his involvement. He texted her friends and family, imitating her writing style to create the illusion that she was still alive. One particular message sent to her family was noticeably formal, unlike Marta's usual warm and casual tone, which raised suspicions. These messages were part of Powell's strategy to delay any suspicion and buy himself time while he remained in the room with Marta's body for nearly 4 days. Marta was last seen alive at 10:56 p.m. on October 15th, when she entered Powell's room. Detectives suspect she died shortly after, likely before midnight, based on a photo Powell took at 11:01 p.m. and the extent of her 32 stab wounds. The injuries to her neck were determined to be the cause of death in the autopsy. The following day, he used Marta's phone to send messages to her male contacts, pretending to be her and attempting to entice them into intimate encounters. On October 17th, just 2 days after Marta's death, surveillance cameras captured him casually walking to a nearby shop to buy 6 cans of beer and a soft drink before returning to his room. He showed no signs of grief, seamlessly blending into the daily life of Kettering while Marta's body lay covered in a blood-stained duvet. This footage was incriminating, revealing a man capable not only of murder but also of continuing his life as if nothing had happened. Powell was arrested on October 21st after his condition stabilized. He faced murder charges, and the evidence against him, CCTV footage, phone records, and forensic analysis, was substantial. Prosecutors presented his motive as jealousy and an inability to accept Marta's new life. He had expressed to friends that he couldn't bear the thought of anyone else being intimate with her, a feeling that ultimately led to his final act. By March 3, 2022, when Powell Kmielewski appeared in Northampton Crown Court and confessed to murdering Marta, the case had already captured the attention of the Kettering community and beyond. His guilty plea eliminated the need for a lengthy trial, which spared Marta's family from the pain of recounting every detail in court. The focus then shifted to a sentencing hearing on September 6, 2023, aimed at determining Powell's punishment and allowing Marta's loved ones to express their grief. Marta's brother and sister-in-law sat in the gallery, visibly heartbroken as they awaited the verdict on the punishment Powell would face for taking her life. The prosecution, represented by Northamptonshire Police and the Crown Prosecution Service, presented a strong argument for a tough sentence. They claimed that Powell's actions were not just a momentary impulse but rather the result of an ongoing pattern of control and obsession. They highlighted the 7 defensive wounds on Marta's right hand as evidence that she fought for her life. The prosecution also referenced Powell's history of domestic abuse, mentioning incidents from August 2020, Easter 2021, and September 2021 to illustrate his increasing aggression. In 2020, he confronted Marta at her workplace on Rockingham Road about her connections with other men, forcibly took her phone to search for evidence of infidelity, then punched her multiple times, resulting in bruises on her back and face, along with a cut lip. Although the police were contacted and Marta initially gave a statement, she later retracted it. Powell offered an apology to his wife through a community resolution process. Marta left him in September that year, but the harassment persisted with continued phone calls and messages. In Easter 2021, he became aggressive during a family party, pushing her. 3 months before her death, he found Marta at the pub, grabbed her arm, and threatened her. The next month, he was reported for harassment. Marta lived in constant fear, telling friends that she was afraid Powell might kill her. Despite her efforts to escape, like moving out, planning to divorce him in Poland, and pleading with him to leave her alone, he continued to stalk and manipulate her, even sending deceptive texts from her phone to avoid raising suspicion. The prosecution highlighted Powell's lack of remorse, noting that he remained with Marta's body for almost 4 days. Powell initially denied his history of abuse while attempting to manipulate the court proceedings. They urged for a life sentence with a lengthy minimum term, arguing that Powell's actions deserved no mercy. On the other hand, Powell's defense team had limited options due to his guilty plea and the strong evidence against him. With the help of an interpreter, they acknowledged the seriousness of his crime but requested a shorter minimum term. They claimed that Powell's actions were impulsive, driven by emotional distress from his divorce and Marta's new relationship. The defense argued that he was deeply affected by the breakup, citing his self-inflicted wounds as signs of remorse or mental anguish. They contended that, although the attack was horrific, it was not premeditated and that Powell's guilty plea had spared the family from a trial. However, these arguments were weak compared to the prosecution's evidence of Powell's calculated stalking and the brutality of the attack. On September 6, 2023, Judge Herbert announced the verdict. Powell Kmielewski was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 18 years and 4 months. The judge directly addressed Powell, stating, "It was a prolonged and violent attack driven entirely by anger and jealousy." He stressed Marta's fear, noting, "The evidence clearly shows that Marta did not feel safe with you and feared you might kill her." The judge cautioned that Powell might never be released, as his eligibility for parole would be based on the parole board's evaluation of his risk to the public. This means that at 40 years old, Powell would be at least 58 before he could apply for parole, reflecting the serious nature of his crime. Marta's family felt the deep impact of the case. Her brother and sister-in-law, who were present at the sentencing, shared a moving statement through Northamptonshire Police, expressing that no sentence could alleviate their suffering. However, they found a small sense of closure in knowing that Powell was held accountable for his actions. Marta Kmielewski's life, marked by warmth, resilience, and a pursuit of freedom, was tragically cut short by Powell Kmielewski's jealousy and violence, leaving her family and the Kettering community in profound grief. The sentencing of Powell to life imprisonment with a minimum of 18 years and 4 months brought a measure of justice, though it could never fill the void left by Marta's absence. Her story serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic abuse and the strength of those who fight for their independence, ensuring her memory endures as a call for awareness and change. On February 17, 2023, in Hexham, England, friends and family gathered to honor 15-year-old Holly Newton at her funeral. Holly was a beloved teenager, known for her kindness. Hundreds of mourners participated in a procession to Hexham Abbey to pay their respects. Holly's mother, Michaela Trussler, shared heartfelt memories of her daughter, stating, "Some people are just too good for this world, and Holly was one of them." Holly's white coffin, decorated with purple flowers and messages of sympathy, was carried along the high street by 4 black horses dressed in purple jackets, her favorite color. One message read, "Sleep tight, beautiful Holly, in the sky until we meet again. Love you forever." She was remembered as a bright, caring young woman with a promising future. Her family and friends described her as compassionate, someone who made a positive impact on everyone around her. Holly enjoyed spending time with friends and engaging in social activities, easily connecting with others thanks to her friendly personality. Holly met Logan MacPhail while participating in Army Cadets, a youth organization focused on military training and activities for young people. This setting often unites individuals with shared interests in discipline and teamwork, which likely helped them bond initially. Their relationship started like a typical teenage romance as they enjoyed each other's company and shared interests. However, as their relationship developed, it became increasingly troubled due to Logan's controlling behavior. Logan's controlling behavior became evident in several ways. He insisted on knowing where Holly was at all times and interfered with her social media by changing her passwords, limiting her ability to connect with others. This is a common sign of someone trying to dominate their partner. Holly's friends and family observed that she was becoming increasingly isolated. Despite these warning signs, Holly initially stayed in a relationship with Logan, which is often the case for teenagers who may not fully recognize the signs of an unhealthy relationship. Michaela mentioned that Logan was Holly's first and only boyfriend, that their relationship had typical teenage ups and downs. Logan spent weekends with Holly's family, and her mother and stepfather were unaware that he was putting on a facade when he visited their home. However, the issues in Holly and Logan's relationship continued to escalate. Eventually, Holly chose to end the relationship due to Logan's obsessive behavior. He struggled to accept the breakup, became even more fixated on her. Michaela observed that her caring and mature daughter was more emotionally developed than Logan, yet when Holly tried to break up with him, he resorted to emotional manipulation, which frightened her. Michaela said she didn't realize the extent of the turmoil Holly was experiencing at that time. Logan had become fixated on Holly, believing that if he couldn't have her, no one else could. She also noted that she didn't recognize the warning signs of his controlling behavior until it was too late, and she was unaware of the emotional distress Holly was facing while trying to break up with Logan. Logan's reaction to the breakup was intense. He started following Holly around town, attempted to control her life. On the night of January 26th, he appeared unexpectedly outside her house and had to be taken home by the police. Holly and her parents were planning to meet with the police to discuss their concerns about Logan, but a tragic event occurred. After Logan showed up at their home uninvited and insisted on speaking to Holly, her mother, McCalla, reached out to Northumbria police for help. They scheduled a meeting for 4 p.m. on January 27th, but Holly requested to delay it so she could go out with friends after school. The meeting was postponed to the evening, but just hours before it was set to happen, a terrible incident occurred involving Holly. In the investigation of Holly's case, detectives uncovered disturbing CCTV footage that showed the moments leading up to her death. The timeline of events from the day after Logan appeared uninvited at Holly's home was pieced together. Unable to accept their breakup, MacPhail left his school early the next day, carrying a kitchen knife in his backpack. He took a bus to Hexham, waited for Holly to go into town. Dressed entirely in black, with a face mask and baseball cap to hide his identity, MacPhail followed Holly and her friends as they visited a leisure center for about 45 minutes. During this time, he also sent several voice messages to people close to Holly, trying to persuade her to meet him in person. After following Holly, MacPhail, then 16, waited at a bus stop and asked to speak to Holly after she came out of the pizza shop. He then lured her into an alleyway and attacked her. MacPhail inflicted 36 knife wounds, including 5 defensive wounds, in the attack earlier in the evening. When her friend heard her scream, he rushed out of the shop to help, but was also stabbed in the shoulder and leg. Shortly after 5:10 p.m. on Friday, January 27, 2023, the police were alerted about the serious assault of a boy and girl in the Priestpopple area of the town center. Emergency services arrived and found the two in a nearby alleyway with several stab wounds. They were both taken to the hospital. Despite the medical team's efforts, Holly died from 36 injuries. She had broken up with MacPhail just 6 days prior to the attack. Holly's friend, whose identity is protected for legal reasons, received treatment and was later discharged. Officers quickly arrested 16-year-old Logan MacPhail at the scene after he was held by courageous bystanders in a bus shelter. The camera footage shows him identifying himself and naming his victim when the police arrived. He then made what appeared to be a confession, saying she was being too horrible to him, while speaking with an officer in the back of a police van. MacPhail later refused to share his date of birth, claiming he can't read or write, he know nothing. After the attack, MacPhail was charged with killing Holly Newton and injuring another 16-year-old. During police interviews, MacPhail showed a disturbing lack of emotion and admitted that he intended to kill Holly, claiming it was because she treated him horribly. It took 18 months for the case to go to court because MacPhail's lawyers argued that his learning disabilities and autism diagnosis made him unfit to stand trial, meaning he wouldn't fully understand the legal process. However, after reviewing evidence from several experts, the judge determined that MacPhail could participate in the proceedings. Throughout the trial, the defense suggested that his various issues meant he didn't grasp the consequences of his actions, but the jurors disagreed. Justice Hilliard addressed, stating, "Logan aimed to lure Holly into the alleyway, a secluded area where you believed you could attack her without anyone intervening." Hilliard believed Logan had already decided to harm her, as Logan realized from her reactions at the bus stop that she was not interested in rekindling his relationship. Fueled by resentment and jealousy, Logan still managed to plan his attack. Logan waited for the right moment, convinced her to move deeper into the alley. After ensuring a passerby had left, then you took out his knife and launched a brutal assault on her. The judge pointed out that Holly suffered severe knife Logan to her jaw, skull, spine, and shoulder during the attack. Justice Hilliard remarked that inflicting such harm was a horrifying act. Holly's mother was prevented from reaching her in the alley or seeing her in the ambulance due to the dreadful state she was in. The attack was so forceful that the knife broke, with the blade bending significantly. The pathologist mentioned that encountering a knife in such a damaged condition is extremely rare. The judge stated, "He believed you intended to kill her and understood the finality of death." It appears MacPhail carried the knife that day to intimidate Holly by harming himself and decided to attack her when he realized their relationship wouldn't be rekindled just before the incident. Justice Hilliard emphasized, Holly had every right to end the relationship and choose to spend time with others. In concluding his remarks during sentencing, Hilliard acknowledged the significance of the relationship to MacPhail, especially considering his troubled home life. His speech impediment hindered his ability to form relationships and friendships with others, making his bond with Holly's particularly valuable, the judge noting that this contributed to MacPhail's struggle to accept the relationship's end. He noted that while MacPhail expressed remorse, he also demonstrated a tendency to blame Holly. His testimony revealed that he had convinced herself that Holly treated him poorly. Before the verdict was announced, Holly's mother made an emotional statement about the day she learned what happened to her daughter. McCullough said that in the months before her murder, it was clear that Holly was unhappy and no longer wanted to continue the relationship. Because she was so young, she didn't know how to get out of it. For Holly, she often felt sorry for people, which is why she kept going back and moving forward. She said that on Friday, January 27, 2023, their lives changed forever. She mentioned that she had kissed her 4 children goodbye as they left for school, and one of them never returned home. She expressed her disbelief about how any parent could understand receiving a phone call from a stranger saying that their daughter had been stabbed. Those words replayed in her mind as they rushed to the scene, with 2 of her children in the car, crying and scared about what was happening. She stated that she never imagined the horrific reality they would face. McCullough reflected that the look of pure trauma on their children's faces when they saw their sister being taken away in an ambulance was something they would never forget. They conveyed that the gravity of the situation was beyond anything they could express. They added that they would always remember being prevented from seeing their daughter in that alley or in the ambulance, from seeing her open eyes or hearing her last words, knowing that they weren't able to be by her side. They mentioned that they couldn't even hug or touch her in the hospital, stating that their daughter became a crime scene and that she was evidence. Holly's situation is a clear example of domestic abuse. Although the law may prevent from labeling it as such due to her age, Logan was so obsessed with her that he felt if he couldn't be with her, no one else should be either. There is so much media coverage of how many women are killed each year by men, it almost normalizes it for young men like Logan. Things have got to change. MacPhail admitted manslaughter but was convicted of murder as well as wounding with intent. He said he wanted to return some of Holly's belongings, slippers, clothes, and teddy bears, but when he was arrested, he didn't have any of them with him. MacPhail was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 17 years, plus an additional 5 years in prison for intentionally wounding another young man who tried to stop the attack. MacPhail was told that even after serving the minimum term, he would only be released when it was deemed safe to do so. Speaking after the sentencing, Detective Darren Davies of Northumbria Police said it was a truly devastating case, with Holly's future cruelly taken away by MacPhail. Of course, nothing will ever reverse the tragic events of that evening, Detective Davies said, adding that he hopes the result will bring Holly's loved ones a sense of closure so they can attempt to move forward. So many lives have been changed forever by the decisions he made that night, and now he will have plenty of time to think about that in his cell. Just after 11 p.m., everything changed. In a small New York City apartment, a loud crashing sound interrupted the quiet. What followed was chaotic and frightening, with neighbors hearing shouting, banging, and objects falling. Then, abruptly, there was silence. Inside the apartment, a young woman found herself in a nightmare she had long dreaded. An ex-lover had returned, and this time he was determined to cause trouble. In 2015, Elena Hardy, nursing student at Hunter College, moved to New York City. Her charming personality made her popular. She quickly made friends in the city. As she focused on her studies and enjoyed the lively atmosphere around her, her promising journey took a troubling turn when she met Fernando Munera. What started as an exciting romance soon turned dangerous. While friends and neighbors often saw them happily walking their dog or riding his motorcycle together, beneath their smiles lay a relationship marked by instability. As time went on, Fernando's behavior became more unpredictable and aggressive. By early 2021, less than a year into their relationship, things escalated to violence. In a terrifying incident, he restrained Elena in her apartment, damaged her possessions, and took her phone to stop her from calling for help. This led to his arrest, where he faced charges of harassment, unlawful imprisonment, and criminal mischief. A restraining order was issued, preventing him from contacting Elena, but he ignored it. Afterward, he began a pattern of constant harassment, bombarding her with calls, dozens in just one weekend. He criticized her appearance and attempted to control how she dressed, even when she was away from home. His obsession grew stronger, and he became increasingly possessive, unable to accept her independence. Neighbors became concerned, noticing his erratic behavior as he muttered to himself and angrily paced in front of the building. On May 19, 2021, tensions escalated dramatically. That evening, Fernando was seen outside, filled with anger, his fists clenched and pacing anxiously. Earlier that day, he had argued with Elena, who refused to let him enter her apartment. He disappeared for several hours, leading many to believe that the situation had calmed down. However, Fernando was actually planning something horrific. Later that night, around 8:45 p.m., chaos erupted. Fernando quickly returned to the building with a knife and a handgun, climbed the fire escape to Hardy's fourth-floor apartment, and broke in through an open window. Inside, Elena barely had time to react. Startled by the sudden crash, she found herself face to face with her ex before she could think or scream. There was nowhere to escape. Within moments, the small apartment turned into a scene of violence. Fernando, consumed by rage, acted on his obsession. He stabbed Elena 7 times, causing cuts and bites, targeting her upper body with calculated brutality. The apartment was filled with the sounds of struggle, Elena's desperate cries, and the chaos that ensued. The room was in disarray, with overturned furniture, blood splattered on the walls and pooling on the floor. She shouted for help, but no one came. Neighbors heard everything, the thuds, the screams, the crashes, but fear kept them paralyzed. Behind closed doors, they listened to the violence unfold just feet away, unaware of the full extent of the horror. Fernando didn't stop his assault. He brandished an air pistol, not as a deadly weapon but as a means to instill fear, showing Elena that even in her last moments, he was in control. His aim was not just to inflict pain but to completely dominate her. She had tried to escape him and take back her life. Elena fought off her attacker, stabbing him in the chest and neck. Fernando followed Elena out of the apartment as she collapsed on the floor. He was covered in blood and had a knife in his hand. Neighbors heard her screams and called the police. She died minutes later in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. Fernando was taken to Harlem Hospital in critical condition and later charged with murder, burglary, and criminal mischief. Investigators looked into his history, uncovered alarming patterns of control, violent outbursts, previous incidents of harassment and assault. Court records showed that Fernando had consistently exhibited volatile behavior. Elena's death was not his first act of violence, it was the latest in a series of warning signs. The restraining order she obtained, which should have provided her some safety, ultimately failed her. Elena's family was devastated. Her mother struggled to accept that her daughter, a vibrant, funny, and kind-hearted individual who had tried desperately to escape her circumstances, was gone. The weight of grief was compounded by the realization that Elena had taken all the right steps. She sought help, established boundaries, and pursued legal action. Yet, none of these efforts were sufficient. As the news of the murder spread, people in New York took to the streets. Women marched to honor Elena, and vigils were organized in her memory. Her story sparked widespread outrage, resonating with countless women who have faced abuse. Elena's death became a poignant symbol, highlighting the failures of the system to protect those who need it the most. Hardy's family has set up a GoFundMe page to help pay for her funeral and transportation back to Arizona, and has already raised more than $10,000. After health has stabilized, at the precinct, Fernando Munera remained silent. He stared straight ahead, refusing to cooperate or provide any explanation or remorse. The detectives had no confession to rely on, just a troubling puzzle filled with obsessive behavior, digital clues, and broken lives. As the investigation progressed, a disturbing picture emerged. Fernando did not view Elena as a partner, he saw her as an object to own. When she tried to establish her independence, when she stood up for herself, he perceived it as a betrayal. In the months before the trial, the evidence against Fernando accumulated. Witnesses reported his strange behavior leading up to the murder. He was seen pacing, mumbling, and watching Elena's apartment. Surveillance cameras captured his movements in detail, showing his journey from the streets to the fire escape to Elena's fourth-floor apartment and crawled through an open window. Forensic evidence, including fingerprints, DNA, and injuries on Elena's body, provided further confirmation. There were no other suspects or uncertainties. The trial focused not on who committed the crime but on whether justice would be served. The courtroom was crowded on the first day of Fernando's trial, with every seat occupied. The atmosphere was heavy with emotions. Elena's family sat at the front, fixed on Fernando, who was responsible for their loss. The prosecution began by outlining a disturbing timeline, illustrating how Fernando had descended into possessive rage. They portrayed him as calculated and deliberate, emphasizing that this was not a spur-of-the-moment act but a planned attack. They presented footage of Fernando lingering outside Elena's building, his body tense and his expression filled with anger. They described how he had initially left but returned armed with both a knife and an air pistol, two weapons, signifying two conscious choices. There was no uncertainty, only a progression toward violence. Then came the photographs from the crime scene left everyone in the room speechless, walls stained with blood, furniture in disarray, and a life taken too soon. A forensic pathologist told the jury about the stab wounds on Elena's upper body. These wounds were not random or chaotic, they were deliberate and targeted. A neighbor recounted the sounds heard on the night of the murder, the crashing noise, faint screams, and then complete silence. Another neighbor mentioned seeing Fernando outside earlier that evening, pacing anxiously with clenched fists, talking to himself with a look in his eyes that suggested something dangerous was brewing. Elena's friends shared her final thoughts from the last days of her life. She had been terrified. She confided in them about the threatening phone calls, the pressure to change her appearance, and her constant fear. One friend read a message Elena had sent. Elena said that she was scared of what Fernando might do, but she didn't know how to make him stop. This statement hit hard, and the room went quiet. The defense presented a different narrative. They acknowledged the attack and the victim's death but portrayed Fernando as a man who had lost control due to an overwhelming relationship. They argued that he had reacted impulsively after being locked out, claiming it was not a premeditated act but rather an emotional breakdown. They referenced his history of mental health issues, suggesting that his behavior stemmed from an undiagnosed condition. A psychologist testified about themes of trauma, instability, and mental decline. In contrast, the prosecution remained firm and clear. They asserted that Fernando did not simply lose control, he planned the attack. He paced back and forth, returned armed, broke in, and used two weapons to stab an unarmed woman 7 times before fleeing. This wasn't an emotional spiral, it was deliberate and calculated violence. His obsession was unrestrained, leading to a tragic outcome fueled by hatred, not a lapse in judgment. Fernando had made his choice long before that night, and Elena Hardy lost her life because of it. As the trial went on, the courtroom became a tense battleground where two contrasting images of Fernando Munera clashed. The defense depicted him as a broken man, filled with remorse and overwhelmed by circumstances. In stark contrast, the prosecution painted a much darker picture. In her final moments, Elena Hardy experienced terror, helplessness, and pain at the hands of a man who viewed her independence as defiance and wanted to control or destroy her. Elena's family attended every day of the trial. Her mother held a framed photo of her daughter, a symbol of a life once filled with joy and hope. Tears streamed down her face whenever the prosecution recounted the brutal details of the crime. Yet amidst the sorrow, there was determination. Elena's mother was resolute in her promise that Fernando would face justice for his actions. In their closing arguments, the prosecution emphasized their message clearly. They urged the jury to view Fernando not as a victim, but as a calculated aggressor. This was not a tragic error, it was a display of brutal violence. Elena was not his partner, she became his target the moment she tried to take back control of her life. The defense made one final attempt to restore Fernando's reputation. They highlighted his remorse, his troubled history, letters from friends who depicted him as kind and caring. However, these sentiments could not erase the stark reality. The evidence, including the images, witness testimonies, stab wounds, and months of increasing harassment, remained undeniable. The jury deliberated for hours. When the verdict of guilty for second-degree murder was read, the atmosphere changed dramatically. A mix of relief, sorrow, and a sense of finality filled the room. Alena's family embraced each other tightly. While this did not bring closure, since nothing could bring her back, it was a meaningful step towards justice. A month later, the courtroom convened again for the sentencing. Alena's mother stood to deliver her victim impact statement. Her hands trembled, her voice conveyed the deep sorrow of a life irrevocably changed. She talked about the void Alena left behind and the silence that now filled her home, contrasting with the joy of her daughter's laughter. The prosecution reiterated their case, this time emphasizing the consequences. They requested the maximum sentence, highlighting the deliberate nature of the crime, how Fernando had disregarded the restraining order, how the cycle of violence had escalated, and how society must seriously recognize the tragic loss of a young woman's life. The defense offered their remaining arguments, attempting to appeal to the jury's compassion. Then Fernando stood up. He was pale and visibly shaken as he faced Alena's family. He mumbled an apology, soft, strained, and nearly inaudible. "I'm sorry," he said. He never meant for this to happen. However, the courtroom remained silent. For those who had endured the pain of losing Alena, his words could not mend what had been broken. The hurt was too profound, and the apology came far too late. The judge announced the sentence with a serious demeanor, Fernando Munera's sentence to 40 years in prison. Alena's family embraced each other, tears streaming down their faces. It was neither a victory nor a moment of healing, but it represented justice, a small comfort amid their profound loss. Alena's story was just starting to inspire change. Her murder ignited a larger movement for action. Her family, determined that her death would not be the end of her narrative, became advocates against domestic violence. They collaborated with local organizations, initiated awareness campaigns, and organized events to educate others about recognizing the signs of abuse and the risks of overlooking warning signs. The restraining order that Alena had obtained, which was disregarded and broken, became a powerful reminder of how the system had failed her. Activists embraced her story, calling on lawmakers to strengthen protections for victims and ensure that violations have real consequences. Alena's friends frequently reminisced about the woman she was. They cherished her laughter, her determination, and her aspiration to become a physician's assistant. She was kind, ambitious, and vibrant. They ensured that when her name was mentioned, people remembered not just how she died, but who she truly was. Ultimately, Alena Hardy's story transcended being just a headline. It evolved into a movement, a reminder, a warning, and a call to action for those still living in fear. The story of Meredith Lynn Sullivan Chapman, 33, captured national attention and was one of the most talked about cases of 2018. Born on January 31, 1985, in Newark, Delaware. Meredith was the youngest of 3 children in the Sullivan family. She was raised in a loving environment, supported by her older brother, Thomas, and sister, Jessica, cherished her. The Sullivan family was financially stable, and her parents ensured that their children received an excellent education while also encouraging them to pursue their personal interests and talents. However, everything changed for Meredith when she was in middle school, as her parents decided to divorce. Fortunately, the separation was friendly, with no significant arguments or legal battles, and both parents continued to be actively involved in their children's lives. Although Meredith found the divorce emotionally challenging, she always felt cared for and loved. Meredith was a kind, outgoing person who easily made friends. Her cheerful and engaging personality made her popular among her peers. From a young age, she excelled in school, learning came easily to her. She was curious, quick to grasp new concepts, and always willing to take the lead. In addition to her academic success, she had a strong passion for painting and was also very active in sports. During high school, she focused on cheerleading, eventually became the team captain. Even as a teenager, Meredith displayed determination and confidence, working hard to achieve her goals. Despite her drive, she treated others with fairness and respect, earning the admiration of both her classmates and teachers. After graduating from high school, Meredith began her studies at the University of Delaware, focusing on corporate communications and social sciences. She quickly adjusted to college life, excelled academically, and received a merit-based scholarship. Meredith stayed active in cheerleading, even giving presentations on it. Additionally, she participated in tennis, dance, and theater productions at the university. In her junior year, she secured an internship at a radio station in Philadelphia, where she managed the station's social media. This experience aligned perfectly with her career goals and deepened her passion for communications. Meredith joined an elite student organization, taking on a significant role that helped her build connections for her future career. For her senior project, she created a documentary about Joe Biden, which received notable recognition, including a nomination for a regional Emmy Award. This success opened opportunities for her in the media and communications field. After graduating with a bachelor's degree in 2007, Meredith worked on Capitol Hill as communications manager for U.S. Congressman Mike Castle and ran a winning campaign for former Delaware State Treasurer Chip Flowers. Her ambition and strong work ethic enabled her to excel in fast-paced environments, and she consistently pursued opportunities for intellectual growth. While in college, Meredith met a slightly older young man named Luke Chapman, who was also a graduate of the University of Delaware. They quickly formed a connection and began dating. Meredith and Luke shared many similarities. Both were intelligent, ambitious, and highly motivated. Luke, like Meredith, aimed for a career in public service, eventually became a member of the New York City Council. For a period, their professional journeys aligned. They both achieved significant accomplishments in their fields. Meredith and Luke had a good income and, shortly after their wedding, bought a large home in a quiet and upscale neighborhood in Fairfield Crest. They chose to delay starting a family to concentrate on their careers in politics. They also adopted a golden retriever named Indy, whom they cared for with the same dedication that others might show to a child. After several years, Meredith changed her career significantly. She left the field of politics to pursue a career in education. She obtained a master's degree in education and returned to the University of Delaware, her former school, where she began teaching public relations and digital marketing courses. She created strategies for social media engagement and researched new communication methods. In addition to teaching, she participated in various university committees. In 2013, Meredith took on the role of marketing director while still lecturing and publishing academic work. Her colleagues and students held her in high regard, praising her intelligence, professionalism, and unwavering dedication. Luke's career was progressing well. He dedicated long hours to work and took his responsibilities seriously. Over time, he and Meredith became deeply focused on their personal ambitions, resulting in them being home together less and less often. As a result, a noticeable distance formed between them. Although they appeared to have a perfect relationship on the outside, the connection between them had faded. Conversations about starting a family had stopped, and their marriage felt more like a formality than a true partnership. However, neither of them rushed to end the relationship, as their living arrangement was functioning adequately. They cohabited more like roommates than spouses, managing their own finances and daily routines separately. There were no fights or confrontations. In public, they projected an image of happiness. No one in their social circle knew what was really happening behind closed doors. In 2016, Meredith chose to re-enter politics, this time as a candidate rather than an assistant or staff member. Driven and ambitious, she launched her campaign to challenge the current senator for Delaware's 8th District, David Soccola. Her campaign gained momentum, and she had a good chance of winning. Ultimately, she lost by a narrow margin of less than 5%. After the election, Meredith returned to her career in education and focused on advancing her academic work. By 2017, she decided to hire an assistant, specifically a creative director, to oversee marketing efforts. She posted the job online and received numerous applications. Meredith personally interviewed each candidate, but one, a 49-year-old named Mark Gerardo, particularly impressed her. He met all the qualifications for the role in terms of experience and skills. During the interview, he made a positive impression and agreed to start working immediately. At that time, Mark was living in North Carolina but was ready to move for the position. He had been married to Jennifer Gerardo, but she stayed behind initially to sell their home and finish other obligations before relocating to join him. Mark proved to be a thoughtful, intelligent, and well-educated person with a strong background in marketing. He exceeded expectations right from the start. He quickly built a good working relationship with his new supervisor, and they found common interests almost immediately. Mark was 16 years older than his young boss. At that time, Meredith had grown emotionally distant from the husband she had been with for nearly 10 years, as both were heavily focused on their careers. Mark's situation was more complex. He had been married for almost 25 years and had remained committed to his wife during that time. As co-workers, they developed a close bond. Their teamwork was seamless, and they had a silent understanding of each other. Mark was dependable, efficient, and skilled. However, beneath their professional connection, a deeper relationship was beginning to form, unnoticed by others. For Meredith, Mark became more than just a trusted colleague. She felt comfortable sharing her personal thoughts and feelings with him, which meant a lot to her. In her busy pursuit of success, she had little time for friends, family, or meaningful conversations. Even her husband felt more like a stranger than a partner. But with Mark, she felt calm, safe, and truly understood. She eventually stopped resisting and invited him to spend time together outside of work. Just 2 weeks after Mark moved to Newark, Meredith suggested they meet after work at a local bar to relax. She wanted to have a conversation in a more casual setting. That evening, Mark opened up to her and, for the first time, shared his story. Mark Gerardo was born in 1968. His parents were strict and deeply religious, enforcing high standards of obedience and discipline in their large family. From an early age, Mark understood the importance of hard work and performed well in school. When Mark was 18, he met Jennifer, who was 16 and working as a waitress at a fast food restaurant. He often visited the restaurant, captivated by the girl behind the counter, but he never mustered the courage to talk to her or share his feelings. Jennifer and her family eventually moved to a nearby town, causing her to lose touch with Mark for several years. In 1990, they met again at a local shopping center where Jennifer worked as a sales associate. Mark was excited to see her but felt too shy to make a move. Noticing this, Jennifer took the initiative and asked him out first. Their relationship quickly grew deeper, and in 1992, Mark proposed. Jennifer happily accepted, and less than a year later, they got married. Mark and Jennifer, newly married, settled in Indianapolis, Indiana, where they purchased a home together. At this point, Mark had completed his degree in graphic design and landed a well-paying job in that field. Jennifer was successful as a real estate agent, so they enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle. Although they never had children, they adopted 3 dogs that they treated as part of their family. To their friends, neighbors, and relatives, Mark and Jennifer appeared to be a perfect couple, deeply in love and genuinely happy. They rarely had public disagreements. Their home was known for its peaceful atmosphere. Both were strong, independent individuals with stable incomes and lives. By the mid-2000s, after being together for over 20 years, the Gerardos faced difficulties. Mark experienced the loss of both his parents in a short time, while Jennifer, who had put a lot of effort into starting her own business, encountered significant financial troubles. Overwhelmed by emotional and financial stress, they decided to make a big change in their lives. They sold their house and moved to the peaceful town of Greenville, South Carolina. Mark quickly secured a stable job in marketing, while Jennifer opted to focus on family life as she looked for the right job opportunity. During this time, they traveled a lot and spent quality time together. The emotional distance that had developed between them began to disappear. Their relationship rekindled, and for a year and a half, they experienced what felt like a second honeymoon. In 2017, Mark started looking for new job opportunities to find a more fulfilling role with better pay. During his search, he found a job posting from Meredith. The couple was not afraid of the move. Mark went ahead first because the job needed him to start right away, while Jen Eyre stayed behind to sell their house and take care of local affairs. She planned to join him in Newark about a month later. That evening, Mark shared his story with Meredith, who listened carefully. In return, she talked about her own life, including her career successes and the slow deterioration of her marriage. As they talked, they connected on a deeper level, feeling as if they had known each other for years. They built a strong sense of trust and stayed at the bar until late at night. Afterward, they went back to Mark's apartment and spent the night together. This marked the beginning of a private relationship that they kept hidden from others. They continued to see each other secretly, often meeting at Mark's place while his wife was out of state. For Meredith, starting a romance with Mark didn't pose any real challenges. Her marriage to Luke had long become a mere formality. For Mark, the situation was much more complicated. First, he had never cheated in his 25 years of marriage. Second, he found himself unexpectedly attracted to Meredith, who was much younger than him. Third, he knew that Meredith was still legally married, just like he was. Despite these issues, Mark and Meredith's relationship continued even after Jen Eyre moved to Newark. From the beginning, Jen Eyre felt that something was off. She sensed that another woman had been in their new home, but she chose not to confront her husband right away. Instead, she decided to gather information to confirm her suspicions. Mark often worked late and became more distant from his family. When Jen Eyre asked him about it, he attributed his behavior to tiredness and a heavy workload. Their physical closeness had almost vanished. This continued for several months until Jen Eyre confronted him about the possibility of infidelity. Mark denied it. Although he attempted to end his affair with Meredith, their bond was too strong, and after a short break, they resumed their secret meetings. Meredith had made a decision. After discussing it with her husband, Luke, they agreed to proceed with a peaceful divorce. On February 14, 2018, Valentine's Day, Jen Eyre confronted Mark. She revealed that she was aware of his affair with his boss. She had hired a private investigator who followed Mark, took compromising photos, and recorded the locations where he met Meredith. With this evidence, Mark had no escape. However, he tried to justify his actions, assuring Jen Eyre that he would end the affair to save their marriage. Unfortunately, this promise was short-lived, as he continued his relationship with Meredith, but now with more caution. Jen Eyre didn't trust Mark, so she decided to keep a close watch on him. She placed a GPS device in his car and installed monitoring software on his phone and computer. She sewed listening devices into Mark's clothes to secretly record his conversations when they were apart. One of those recordings captured Jen Eyre's growing insecurity. The situation escalated when Mark discovered the tracking device. Realizing he could no longer put off an important decision, he told Jen Eyre that he had fallen in love with Meredith, his boss, and wanted to be with her. He also announced his plans to file for divorce. This news was a severe shock for Jen Eyre, who was 47 at the time. After nearly 25 years of marriage, her husband was leaving her for a younger woman. To make things worse, they had recently moved to a new city, and Jen Eyre had not yet found a job. This left her feeling financially unstable, emotionally unsupported, and lost. Her life felt like it was falling apart, and she was struggling to cope. By early March 2018, Meredith completed her divorce from Luke and was no longer tied to any commitments. She anticipated that Mark would also finalize his divorce soon, but his situation was more complicated. Due to specific legal requirements in their new state, Mark needed to establish residency before he could file for divorce, and they had only recently moved. At the same time, Meredith resigned from her job at the University of Delaware. She was about to start a new role as Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at Villanova University, one of Pennsylvania's top institutions. Additionally, she received an offer for a leadership position at Ruffalo Noel Levitz, a prominent consulting firm specializing in higher education strategy. On April 5th, Meredith moved into her new home in Radnor Township, Pennsylvania. She was gradually getting settled, and about a week later, Mark joined her. He had also left his previous job and started a new role at Villanova University as Meredith's personal assistant. It felt like a fresh start for the couple, a promising new chapter. They just needed to complete a few final steps to fully embrace this new beginning, but they were unaware that a deadly threat was already approaching. Hurt and betrayed, Jen Eyre began plotting a disturbing act of revenge. On April 23, 2018, Mark and Meredith had plans to meet at a local restaurant to celebrate a fresh start. Before heading to the restaurant, Meredith stopped by her house to change clothes while Mark ordered their meal and waited for her. As time went by, Meredith didn't arrive, and she wasn't answering her phone, making Mark uneasy. Suddenly, he received a series of alarming messages from Jen Eyre, filled with anger and resentment. She wished him endless misery, and then he received a photo that shocked him. It was a picture of Meredith's kitchen. In a panic, Mark abandoned everything and rushed to Meredith's house. When he arrived, he saw her car parked in the driveway. A black Chevrolet was also parked down the street, but Mark didn't pay much attention to it at the time. The lights were on inside the house, and the front door was unlocked. However, as soon as he stepped inside, he was met with silence. He went directly to the kitchen, was horrified to find Meredith, 33, and Jen Eyre, 48, lying on the floor in large pools of blood. It was too late for them, both died from gunshot wounds. Mark screamed and rushed outside. His cries alarmed the nearby neighbors, who quickly called for emergency services. Initially, investigators thought Mark might have been involved in the incident due to his emotional struggles and complicated relationship with Jen Eyre. However, this theory was quickly dismissed. The weapon was discovered under Jen Eyre's body and contained only her fingerprints. Authorities concluded that the act was premeditated, followed by her own self-harm. Before the incident, Jen Eyre had sent several emails to a close friend expressing her intentions to do something drastic. Later evidence showed she had spent around 2 weeks preparing for this. She bought a firearm, rented a car, and collected items for a disguise. Jen Eyre also managed to find Meredith's new address on her own. For an entire week, she observed the couple's activities. Neighbors reported seeing a woman in a wig driving a black Chevrolet and lingering in the area, but she did not seem threatening. Mark also remembered noticing the car but thought it belonged to someone from the neighborhood. Jen Eyre had closely observed Meredith's routine and was aware of when they typically returned home. On the day of the incident, she arrived early, parked her car a few blocks away, and approached their house. She gained entry by breaking a window in the backyard and quietly entered. It is believed her intention was to confront, kill both Mark and Meredith before taking her own life. However, things did not go as planned. Meredith came home alone. Investigators later discovered that Meredith had taken out a life insurance policy valued at $500,000 about a year and a half prior, naming her ex-husband, Luke, as the beneficiary. After the divorce, this designation had not been changed. As a result, Luke Chapman became a person of interest as authorities looked into possible indirect involvement in the case. However, this theory was ultimately ruled out due to insufficient evidence. The investigation took only a few days, and authorities quickly closed the case, concluding that the responsible person was deceased, that there were no other suspects. Mark was exonerated but faced significant public and media scrutiny. Rather than withdrawing, he decided to speak out, giving interviews and appearing on talk shows to discuss the events in detail. A year later, Mark released a memoir detailing his relationships with both women and the circumstances surrounding the tragic incident. He expressed how deeply the experience affected him, noting that he never expected the woman he had been with for nearly 25 years could do something so devastating. While the book became a bestseller and was generally well received, public opinion was mixed. Some critics accused him of exploiting the situation and profiting from the tragedy by sharing his personal story. Meredith's family sued Luke after he refused to return the life insurance money he received after her death. The court ruled in his favor, ordering him to return only 10% of the total amount to her family, as the judge found no malicious intent on his part. Meredith had not expected to die and had not updated her policy before her passing. After she died, her remains were cremated, and her urn was given to her parents. Jennifer Gerardo was buried in her hometown of Fort Wayne, Indiana. Many still believe that Mark was also meant to be a victim that night but narrowly escaped a tragic fate.
Leslie Perlow, a 21-year-old woman, worked at the law library in the Palo Alto courthouse in California and lived there with her family. She led a normal life and was studying at Stanford University at the time of a tragic incident in 1973. With ambition and determination, she focused on developing her career before thinking about settling down and starting a family. On Tuesday, February 13, 1973, Leslie was last seen leaving work around 3 p.m. When she did not return home, her family initially assumed she might have gone for her usual walk around the Stanford campus, but as time passed and she still hadn't appeared, they began to worry. After contacting friends and colleagues, but no one had any information about her, the family organized a search. When their efforts led nowhere, they reported her missing to the police, who took the situation seriously and began investigating. 2 days later, on February 15th, officers discovered Leslie's body in bushes near the university campus. She had been strangled with her scarf and showed clear signs of a brutal attack, including bruises covering her body. Evidence revealed that she had been abused, and her underwear and pantyhose were stuffed into her throat. She was partially undressed, and blood stained her clothing. The autopsy confirmed strangulation as the cause of death, and further evidence, nail clippings and bodily fluids, indicated she had fought back fiercely. At the time, forensic technology, such as DNA profiling, was not advanced, and there were no criminal databases. Near where the body was found, police found Leslie's orange Chevrolet Nova abandoned near an old, deserted building. Her shoes were still in the car, but no significant evidence was gathered from the car or the scene. Despite efforts to identify suspects, none of Leslie's friends, family, or colleagues could provide clues. Leslie, described by everyone as calm and unassuming, made the murder a huge shock to all who knew her. The investigation quickly stalled after all potential suspects close to Leslie were ruled out through verified alibis. After 5 days, law enforcement turned to the public for help, releasing details about her car and its isolated parking location, hoping for witnesses. Police received several tips through phone calls, though none led to viable leads. A month later, authorities discovered the body of a young man named Mark Roswell, who had died just half a kilometer from where Leslie was found. Mark has ties to the court where Leslie works, is currently on probation for distributing illegal substances. Investigators looked into the possibility of a connection between Leslie and Mark, suspecting that Mark's case may have been motivated by guilt. However, interviews with courthouse staff confirmed there was no known relationship between the two. Family and friends of both Leslie and Mark were unable to establish any link. After thoroughly investigating Mark's background, detectives found no evidence suggesting a history of violent crime. His only prior offense was dealing banned substances. Ultimately, Mark was ruled out as a suspect. Despite significant efforts, Leslie's case remained unsolved. During this time, a new lead surfaced when a police officer contacted the station. Although he had been off duty on the night Leslie was killed, he had seen her car by chance while driving home through a secluded area. According to his report, on Tuesday, February 13th, he noticed an orange Chevrolet parked near an abandoned building. The sight caught his attention because the location was usually deserted. Alongside the Chevrolet, he saw a gray car and a young man with long blonde hair standing between the two vehicles. Leaning over as if speaking to someone, he observed the situation for a while, but did not notice anything overtly suspicious, so he continued on his way. While his account provided some useful information, he unfortunately didn't recall the license plate of the gray car. Based on certain evidence, detectives began to suspect that Leslie might have been the victim of not just a violent crime, but also a serial killer. Their suspicions were reinforced by the fact that several serial killers were active in the state during the early 1970s. The media immediately picked up on this theory, and over the years, speculations arose that Leslie might have been a victim of infamous killers
like the Zodiac or Herbert Mullin, both of whom were responsible for multiple murders in the region. Even Ted Bundy was considered a suspect, as he was attending school in San Francisco during this period and lived near Stanford. Another theory attributed her death to a cult known as the Angels of Death, whose victims were found in San Francisco. However, as the investigation struggled to gain traction, detectives explored every lead. Over time, prominent suspects such as Ted Bundy, the Zodiac, and others were cleared of involvement. A year after Leslie's tragic death, another devastating incident shook the community. On Sunday, March 24, 1974, 21-year-old Janet Taylor was preparing for a busy day of work and visiting friends. Her car had broken down the day before and was in the repair shop, so her father gave her a ride to work. After finishing her shift, Janet planned to stop by her friend Deborah's house. Janet was a young woman full of ambition. She had recently turned 21 and was the daughter of a well-known university coach. She worked hard as a university student and dreamed of a successful career. That evening, after spending time with Deborah, Janet realized around 7 p.m. that she urgently needed to return home to let the dogs out for a walk. Wanting to avoid inconveniencing anyone, she refused to call her father or accept Deborah's help. Instead, she decided to hitchhike to her home in La Honda, a short distance away in an area surrounded by nature reserves near Stanford. Confident in her decision, Janet believed there was no reason to worry, and Deborah didn't perceive any danger either, a mistake that would prove to be fatal. The next morning, Janet's boyfriend noticed that she hadn't returned home. Alarmed, he contacted her friends and family to try to determine what had happened, but no one had seen her. Later that same morning, a milk delivery driver traveling near Stanford noticed something suspicious on the side of the road. When he stopped to investigate, he made a horrifying discovery. It was the body of a young woman. When the police arrived, they identified the victim as Janet Taylor. She had been strangled with her own sweater. Although she was clothed, her shoes were missing. Oddly, her feet were clean, despite the heavy rain the night before. While her body was damp, the ground underneath was dry, suggesting she had been placed there after her death. Janet's clothes were torn, and, like Leslie's, her underwear and stockings had been forcibly shoved into her throat. Investigators confirmed that she had been abused before being killed and subjected to prolonged beatings. Some of her belongings were missing initially, but were later found scattered along the roadside. Her clothes had been discarded over a stretch of approximately 500 meters on both sides of the road, leading investigators to believe the killer had deliberately disposed of them while driving. Janet's body was discovered just 2 kilometers away from the location where Leslie's body had been found the previous year. Not only did both women share a striking similarity in appearance, but the perpetrator also used similar methods in both crimes. These resemblances strongly suggested that the 2 women had fallen victim to the same serial killer. The shocking connection alarmed the community, heightening concern as the realization of a potential serial murderer set in. Rumors quickly spread that a maniac was active in the area, leaving residents feeling unsafe. People criticized the police for failing to stop the violent crime wave gripping the city. One curious detail united the victims: they were all found barefoot, with their shoes discovered far from their bodies. The victims, all young women, were similarly dressed in raincoats, a coincidence likely explained by the weather. However, the absence of their bags appeared deliberate. It was confirmed that Leslie and Janet had carried bags, but these were never recovered. Some speculated that the killer kept the items as trophies, a behavior often associated with serial offenders. Once the similarities in the cases were identified, the 2 police departments began collaborating. Shortly after Janet's murder, Peter Thompson was attacked in a seemingly unrelated incident on March 30, 1974 in California. At 4:20 am, a passing motorist discovered Peter bloody and injured near his parked car by the roadside. The motorist called for help, and police arrived to investigate. In the back seat of Peter's car, they found broken beer bottles, which appeared to have been used to cut his face. Peter explained to detectives that he had picked up a hitchhiker who attacked him after provoking a conflict. Meanwhile, forensic experts searched the area around Peter's car and the spot where the hitchhiker was allegedly picked up. Nearby, they discovered an open beer pack matching the broken bottles found in Peter's car. At the same time, a deputy sheriff reported seeing a suspicious man with long blonde hair who ran away upon noticing the officer. Unfortunately, the man evaded capture. It is noteworthy that a person with similar characteristics was also seen near the scene of Leslie's murder. Detectives questioned Peter further, during which something unsettling emerged when asked for his contact information. Peter provided the details of a woman named Barbara Rocky, claiming he had met her before. Investigators soon learned, however, that Barbara had been murdered 2 weeks earlier, on March 11, 1974, in Utah, near the Grand Canyon. Barbara, a 22-year-old college student, had been killed after voluntarily going with her attacker. She was abused and then shot 5 times in the back with her own Magnum .357 pistol. Chillingly, her killer had carefully folded her clothes beside her body, suggesting an emotional attachment to her. Barbara's death raised further questions. Detectives discovered that she was acquainted with Janet Taylor, one of the other victims, a connection that appeared too coincidental to ignore. Peter's claim of knowing Barbara came under intense scrutiny, especially since he appeared confused during questioning and delayed his responses, as though crafting a story. However, the investigation ultimately revealed no evidence linking Peter to the murders. He had no motive, and it was confirmed that he was not in Utah at the time of Barbara's death. His account of the hitchhiker attack remained plausible, with no conclusive evidence to prove or disprove it. Nevertheless, investigators continued exploring possible connections between Barbara and the other victims, interviewing those close to her. This effort led them to Gerald Hicker, a former university classmate of Barbara's with a documented history of violence against women. Further investigation revealed that Gerald was responsible for Barbara's murder. Despite this breakthrough, no evidence linked Gerald to the murders of Leslie or Janet, even though Barbara's case bore similarities to the others. Ultimately, Gerald was charged only in Barbara's death, leaving the murders of Leslie and Janet unsolved. In March 1975, a year after Janet's disappearance, the investigation into her case took an unexpected turn. A local journalist reported that San Mateo County Sheriff's deputies had searched a rental room based on a tip from an anonymous source. The room had been rented by a long-term tenant who had moved out a few weeks earlier. The tenant was reportedly behaving suspiciously, and during the search, police discovered photographs of a woman resembling Janet Taylor, along with a newspaper article about her murder. The young man who had occupied the room was quickly located. However, he remained calm and claimed to have been a close friend of Janet. Witnesses confirmed their friendship, and his possession of the photographs and the newspaper clipping was deemed innocent memorabilia. As a result, he was not arrested. In July 1975, the San Mateo newspaper published another story, reporting that investigators working on Barbara's murder were exploring possible links to Janet's case and had uncovered new leads. Though no specific suspect was mentioned, a police officer stated that progress had been made and an arrest was expected soon. At that time, it seemed as if investigators were once again considering Peter Thompson's involvement. Janet and Barbara were acquaintances who were killed within 2 weeks of each other. Peter Thompson, a mutual friend, died under suspicious circumstances shortly after their deaths. Witnesses reported seeing a long-haired hitchhiker who matched Peter's description, driving a car associated with Leslie's disappearance. However, Peter was eventually ruled out as a suspect. After his death, the investigation stalled, and there were no significant developments for decades. The case remained dormant until 2008, when true crime enthusiasts speculated whether Ted Bundy could have been involved in the Stanford killings. Investigators explored this possibility, but found no evidence connecting Ted to the crimes. By that point, law enforcement had determined with confidence that Barbara's murder was unrelated to the murders of Janet and Leslie. Despite these conclusions, murders continued to occur in the Stanford area, and new victims occasionally emerged. For instance, in October 1974, Alice Perry was found murdered. Like the others, there were no immediate suspects. Authorities believed a serial killer might be targeting victims around Stanford, further complicating efforts to solve the original cases. These investigations extended well into the 1980s. When Ted Bundy was arrested and sentenced to death in Florida, he began confessing to unsolved murders, eventually admitting to 23 killings across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. However, no documented murders were tied to Leslie and Janet. Investigators made several attempts to link him to the Stanford murders, but all efforts failed. He was executed in 1989, by which time authorities had definitively ruled him out as a suspect in the murders of Janet and Leslie through DNA evidence. These cases remained unsolved for decades, with frustration further muddling the investigation. For example, serial killer Herbert Mullin, who confessed to murdering 13 victims, killed his last victim on the same day Leslie disappeared, just a few kilometers from where her body was later found. Similarly, Ted Bundy had reportedly been in the Stanford area at the time of Leslie's murder, and her appearance matched his victim profile. However, DNA evidence eventually excluded him as a suspect. For many detectives, coincidences are rarely dismissed, but in this case, the overlapping incidents only clouded the investigation and delayed progress. Meanwhile, the real killer remained at large. The cases saw no breakthroughs until 2016, when investigators reopened several cold cases. They revisited the murders of Leslie and Janet, this time utilizing innovative genetic genealogy techniques developed by Parabon Nanolabs. Law enforcement had collected DNA evidence from the abuse and suspected killer at the very beginning, and all samples were sent for genealogical analysis. This seemed promising because the company's innovative techniques had already solved several cold cases that had remained unsolved for decades. After completing the genealogical analysis, detectives received the results. Using the DNA profile, they created a family tree, and by 2018, the police identified a possible suspect. However, they couldn't confront him directly. Instead, detectives began discreetly monitoring 74-year-old John Guthrie. One day, during surveillance, John and his wife visited a coffee shop. After drinking his coffee, John discarded his cup in the trash. Detectives quickly retrieved the cup and sent it for testing. The DNA sample from the cup matched 100% with the traces found on the bodies of Leslie Perloff and Janet Taylor. In 2018, John was living with his wife in Hayward, California. He was arrested for the murders committed in 1973. 45 years after the crimes, investigators discovered that John, a medical technician at Stanford Hospital at the time, had no known connection to the victims. During the initial investigation, John had already attracted suspicion due to his criminal history. His record showed a pattern of incidents of an abusive nature, with his criminal behavior beginning in his youth. For instance, on June 8, 1963, when he was 18, John offered to walk 15-year-old Margaret Williams home after a dance near the military base where she lived with her family in Bad Kreuznach, Germany. Margaret never made it home. When Margaret missed her curfew, her family immediately alerted the police. Within 2 hours, her body was found. Witnesses helped authorities identify John as the perpetrator. He had taken Margaret to a baseball field, assaulted her, abused her, and killed her by striking her on the head. Found guilty, John faced a maximum sentence of 10 years under the laws at the time. Ultimately, he served 6 years in a juvenile prison and was released early in 1969 under the condition that he leave Germany. He returned to the United States, secured a job at a hospital, and married his colleague Susan, who had a daughter, Katie, from a previous relationship. For 8 years, John appeared to be a decent family man. However, during this time, he abused his stepdaughter Katie, threatening to kill her mother if she reported him. Katie later described him as a monster. In 1977, Susan caught John abusing her daughter Katie. They divorced, but for reasons unknown, Susan did not report the abuse to the police. A few months later, John married Linda Caputa, with whom he remained married for 24 years, until her death in 2002. They had 2 children, and John appeared to be a loving and responsible father. For years, John's children and others believed the allegations against him were false, unaware that he had killed Leslie in 1973 and Janet in 1974. In 1975, however, John was involved in another crime that finally drew law enforcement's attention. He was charged with abusing a 17-year-old girl in Santa Clara County while serving as a leader of a youth scout organization. He pled guilty as part of a plea bargain and received a lenient sentence, 6 months in prison and a small fine. This crime demonstrated that he was prone to abusing and strangling his victims, but authorities still did not connect him to Leslie and Janet's murders. At one point, John was even considered a suspect. A San Mateo County Sheriff's deputy noticed that John's criminal behavior closely resembled the killer's methods in the Janet Taylor case. However, in the 1970s, DNA technology was unavailable, which prevented law enforcement from creating a DNA profile to confirm his guilt. Decades later, with advancements in DNA technology, John Guthrie was finally identified as the primary suspect in these brutal crimes. The investigators reanalyzed all the evidence they possessed at the time, which led to the development of a male DNA profile based on biological fluid traces collected from the victim's clothing. When this DNA was compared to a sample from John Guthrie, it was a 100% match, confirming him as the perpetrator. This revelation sparked mixed emotions, especially within the local community. Many criticized the police, as John had initially been wrongfully suspected of murdering Alice Perry. The true perpetrator, when approached for arrest, took his own life, a tragic pattern that would repeat decades later. However, John was far from blameless in other violent incidents. As investigators delved into his past, they uncovered that he had lived in Aga and New Jersey for several years, during which women frequently reported similar attacks. These findings suggested he may have been responsible for many more crimes. While authorities investigated John's potential involvement in other unsolved murders, prosecutors in 2 counties prepared for trials linked to separate cases. After the arrest of a suspect in Leslie's murder, the same individual was charged 6 months later with Janet's murder. In both cases, DNA evidence served as the primary foundation. Janet's and Leslie's families were determined to seek justice. They refused to negotiate, ensuring the criminal would face the full consequences of his actions. During the trial, Susan's daughter, Katie, who had suffered abuse at his hands and was familiar with John's cruel tendencies, provided crucial testimony. Upon learning about the murders, Katie was horrified to realize she could have become one of his victims. She recalled how she and John would pass the location where Leslie's body was found nearly every day on their way to school. At the time of both crimes, John was approximately 30 years old. Notably, witnesses described a suspect with long blonde hair at the scene, raising questions about whether John had an accomplice or whether he disguised himself by wearing a wig. On September 15, 2021, John Guthrie, then 77 years old and in custody, was convicted of Janet Taylor's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In 2023, he confessed to Leslie Perloff's murder and received a second life sentence. While this confession offered some relief to the victims' families, it was devastating for John's loved ones, who had steadfastly believed in his innocence. Following these convictions, his children publicly disowned him. Later that year, John passed away in prison. According to the official report, his death was due to natural causes. Detectives remain convinced that he was responsible for other murders, but have yet to gather sufficient evidence to conclusively link him to additional crimes.